Chapter 425. In the blink of an eye, 17 years had passed since Zhang Yan started his closed-door training. On this day, the sound of rolling stones was heard from the small pot mirror. It was like the beating of a drum in the sky. Zhang Yan sat cross-legged on the jade couch with his palms facing the sky while the vital energy on his body surged. The baleful qi in his body was like smoke that surged out and filled the entire bamboo building before dispersing outwards to cover this entire area of the heavens and the earth. But in the blink of an eye, his entire body seemed to be enveloped by thick clouds, and his figure could barely be discerned. Then, streams of brilliance flashed out from the thick mist and clouds. First, there was a gilded halo of light. In just a flash, it emitted a dense and sharp aura. It cut through the bamboo building and shot out 1,000 feet away. The sound of air tearing and the aura dragging, the cold light shone through the sky, and it only disappeared after a while. After the golden light faded away, a cluster of jade-green light appeared once more. It rose higher and higher until it pierced the clouds. Then, it spread out in all directions like a curtain. There were thousands of them, and they hung down to the ground before rolling up again. They were endless and full of vitality. The light flashed for a moment and then slowly disappeared. At this time, the sound of water was heard again. There was a blue light floating in the fog. It was like the surging tide, but also like the monstrous waves. It rushed and surged with great momentum. About an hour later, the rain stopped and the sky turned green. Under the clear sky, a red glow burst forth and a ball of flames burned fiercely like the rising sun. The bamboo building was touched by this fire, and with a bang, it immediately turned into ashes, leaving only black ashes that filled the sky and scattered down. The fire jumped for a while and then stopped. What replaced it was a ball of thick yellow light. With a slight movement, a mound of earth was lifted up from the bamboo building. It was like a mound. In a moment, it rose to 1,000 feet high and was as majestic as a mountain. The 5 lights flashed one after another. It went back and forth for 100 times before it finally stopped. Zhang Yan pushed the Dan evil away and revealed himself. At this moment, his eyes were bright and his spirit was high. The robe on his body was fluttering. After this seclusion, he finally gathered all 5 elements' true light. It turned out that he used 14 years to deduce the 5 elements cultivation method, but it took him another 3 years to fuse them together. He used the remnant of the jade to deduce it repeatedly and got rid of a lot of redundant and complicated details. Finally, he refined them into one and became a mystical technique until today. He could move with his heart like he was moving his fingers. Once this technique was completed, his battle prowess increased greatly. Naturally, he was overjoyed. It was important to know that the 5 elements were complete. Once one's cultivation reached a deeper level, it would be able to derive all sorts of wonderful effects. It couldn't be compared to before. However, his Tai Shen 5 elements Zhenfa was only a small success, and there were still many flaws. If he wanted to achieve great success and return to the ancient Tai Shen sect, there was still a long and bumpy road ahead of him. The grand competition of the 16 sects was almost over. There were 39 years left, and the next step was to condense the true seal of spiritual power. Zhang Yan was not in a hurry to cultivate. Instead, he cast a spell, and a water mirror appeared in front of him, reflecting all the disciples in the cave abode. The mirror spirit noticed his movement. It also came out and waited by the side, quietly waiting for instructions. Zhang Yan looked for a moment. When he saw that everything was stable and there was no change, he was relieved. He waved his hand and summoned the mirror spirit. He said, "How many acupuncture points has Yenny burned?" The mirror spirit bowed and said, "Master, Lunyangzi has burned 32 acupuncture points 10 years ago. Now he is in seclusion, and I don't know how much progress he has made. As for those 36 acupuncture points, it takes longer to burn them. I think he needs more time." Zhang Yan nodded with relief. If an ordinary disciple could burn more than 20 acupuncture points, he would not wait any longer and would condense the elixir into a pill. However, Lu Yenny still stopped at the acupuncture point. That was to stabilize the foundation, so that the grade of the pill would be higher in the future. After receiving his secret technique, He didn't know how far his eldest disciple could go. He himself had experienced this dangerous stage, and he knew that the step of condensing the elixir had to be very careful. If there was a slight mistake, there would be no turning back. He pondered for a while and felt that if he waited until he entered the third stage of core transformation, then he would have a much higher chance of helping her condense the elixir. After thinking about it, he waved his hand and dismissed the mirror spirit. Then he reached into his sleeve and took out 2 jade boxes. Inside the boxes were the true seal talisman that Zhong Muqing and the sect leader gave him. In this true seal, there was a trace of the consciousness and essence of the senior master, who had already pointed out the path ahead. When the disciple wanted to condense the true seal, he only needed to follow the path of the senior and refine it step by step. There was no need to waste much effort. It could be said that if a cultivator obtained the sect's inheritance, it was not easy to cross this stage, but compared to the danger of melting medicine and condensing the elixir, it was much easier. However, Zhang Yan had condensed the first stage of the elixir. Whether or not he had a teacher to guide him, he had no predecessor's method to learn from. He thought to himself, to think that the 2 seniors in the sect did not have any method to learn from, but they were still able to force their way out. They are really amazing. Other than the founder of the Qinsong school, there were 2 other seniors who also condensed the first stage of the elixir. However, it was by chance, and it might not be as they wished to do it again. As for condensing the true seal, they had the help of a magic treasure left behind by the founder of the sect, so they did not leave any method of condensing the spiritual energy in this world. When the great change in the Qinsong school happened 100 years ago, this magic treasure was taken by the fierce person, so this path was considered to be cut off. Because it was rare to condense the first stage of the elixir since ancient times, not many people paid attention to it. Later on, when Zhang Yan condensed the first stage of the golden elixir, a few people in the sect who had experienced the change on that day thought about it just now, and they were faintly on guard, realizing that the fierce person might have done it on purpose that day. Although Zhang Yan did not have the help of a magic treasure, he had the remnant of the jade, so he was not afraid. Although he was full of confidence, when he did things, he was still extremely careful. To form the true seal, he had to first understand the profoundness of it. He took a deep breath, reached into his sleeve, and grabbed the remnant of the jade. His mind sank and he began to deduce. What he was deducing now was not only the 2 true seals, but also the method of condensing the seal from the Luo Academy. There were more than 300 methods, and they were all left behind by the seniors in the Qinsong school. He was also very lucky that he joined the Qinsong school. After 10,000 years of accumulation, he had such a deep foundation. If it was a small sect, it would be good if he could find a few methods. But even so, most of these methods were inferior methods, and there were very few intermediate methods. There was not a single superior method. He just wanted to explore the theory and find out the differences and similarities. He did not want to use it as a reference, so there was not much difference between the good and the bad. Time slowly passed, and another 2 years passed in the small pot mirror. In the jade, Zhang Yan had deduced for close to 100 years. Apart from trying to condense the true seal that Zhong Muqing and sect leader Qin gave him, he also practiced the 300 methods to condense the true seal one by one. Just now he stopped. At this moment, his understanding of the true seal was so deep that no one in this realm could compare to him. He understood why the true seal was condensed like that, what it was long and what it was short of. The dermic power true seal that Zhong Muqing had given him was ever-changing. If one used this method to condense the true seal, one would be much faster than normal people when cultivating abilities and techniques, and it would greatly increase one's combat strength. The true seal that the sect leader gave him all the branches, and only the main one was left. It could be said that there was only one path. Both of these techniques had their merits. Zhang Yan guessed that the person who left the true seal was someone who loved to fight. Just now he would walk this path. As for the sect leader's true seal, if he focused on cultivating and broke through, he would be far better than others. His future achievements would be immeasurable. However, that didn't mean that there were no fighting techniques within. It was just purely based on formations. Compared to the former, it was much lacking. The former focused on techniques, the latter focused on the Tao, so it was hard to say who was better and who was worse. At this moment, Zhang Yan had an idea of what path he should take. He wasn't prepared to copy the former, but to open up a new path. He straightened his body, his mind sinking into the jade once more. He started to practice what he was thinking about. However, this time, the time he spent was much longer than he had expected. Even with the hard work from before, he used a year, which was 40 years in the jade. He tried many times and went through many setbacks. Just now he was able to deduce a technique to condense the true seal. However, at this step, he faced something weird. Every time he used this method to condense the true seal, the result would be different. After carefully searching for the reason, he understood. He thought to himself, so, when condensing the true seal, even if there is a small difference, it will lead to a different result. There is no fixed method to follow. Since that was the case, he decided not to waste any more effort. He kept the jade and sat on the meditation mat, picking up the technique. The golden pellet under his stomach was guided. It shook and gathered all the vengeful energy in its body. It followed the method of condensing the true seal and started to revolve. In an instant, the golden core that seemed like glass emanated a 5-colored and brilliant light, and then an illusory and indeterminate true seal floated up from it. It was dazzling like rosy clouds, translucent, crystalline, and enshrouded in mist, and there were countless talismans, bird scripts, and erosive texts floating up into appearance. When the seal became more and more real, the talisman seal script became more and more clear and endless essence was born from it. Zhang Yan's spirit couldn't help but be excited. This essence chi was formed when condensing the true seal. If he could use it in time, he could greatly improve his cultivation method and abilities. After a core formation cultivator passed this stage, their strength would suddenly rise by a level. He knew that he had cultivated quite a few Tao techniques, but there were only a few that could truly defeat the enemy. The 5 elements true method was the foundation of his Tao cultivation, and it was the most important part. If he could improve on this Tao technique, that would be for the best. Because of this, without hesitation, he immediately channeled the spiritual chi into the technique and continued to push it up. This technique climbed step by step and its power also increased. When Zhang Yan almost suspected that this technique would swallow all the essence in one go, his body trembled. He found that if he continued to improve, the progress of this technique would be very slow. He controlled the momentum and no longer wasted essence on it. Instead, he tried to improve the Purple Heaven Thunder technique. This technique was indeed very powerful. Up until now, he had not seen anyone who could contend against it head-on. He had planned to strengthen this technique a long time ago. Zhang Yan's Dan had reached the 1st grade. The essence was boundless like the sea. When the Purple Heaven Thunder technique could no longer evolve, he found that there was still a lot left. He roughly estimated that the 5 elements true method had absorbed more than half of his essence chi, which was about 60%, while the Purple Cloud Godly Thunder had absorbed 20%, leaving 20%. If he didn't use up all of this essence chi when he condensed the true seal today, it would slowly dissipate after the seal was formed. Therefore, he didn't hesitate to choose the Billowing Cloud technique, the Mysterious Yellow Dragon Capturing Hand, and the True Freedom technique, respectively, and poured his essence chi into them. After an unknown amount of time, when the essence was used up, the true seal that was originally uncertain suddenly shook and condensed into a solid form. It then fell into the golden Dan and disappeared. At this moment he was in a trance. When he woke up, he suddenly stood up and circulated his Xian technique. He couldn't help but laugh. At this moment, he had already condensed the true seal and entered the 3rd grade of the core transformation realm. Chapter 426. Zhang Yan achieved the core transformation stage 3 in one fell swoop. At his level of cultivation, he was only 1 step away from the Yuaning state. Although it was only a short step, it was like 1,000 mountains and 1,000 rivers. He needed to put in a lot of effort and practice before he could succeed. At this moment, he did not end his cultivation but pondered if he should take another step forward. After the cultivators of the Xianmen sect condensed their mana and true seal, It was considered a success. However, it was different for the cultivators of the devil doctrine. They still needed to work hard, and that was to brand the true seal into their spirit. In this way, just like Tai Heng Laosher, even if his physical body was destroyed, he could just change to another body. He did not need to cultivate all the spells that he had practiced in his life from the beginning. He just needed to cultivate it a little more before he could use it. Although Zhang Yan did not think that he would abandon his physical body, the path of cultivation was dangerous and no one knew what would happen in the future. Moreover, the 1,000-year devil calamity was just around the corner. It was always good to be prepared. Now that his origin spirit was powerful enough to bear the weight of this seal, and he also had the complete soul contract, it wasn't difficult for him to do this. Therefore, he deliberately used about 3 days to refine the true seal into one and brand it into his spirit. Only then could he be considered to have completed his cultivation. He carefully examined himself and felt that the spiritual opportunity in his body was abundant. All his skills had improved, especially the Tai Shen 5 Elements True Technique. It really saved him many years of hard work. Apart from the unimportant ones, only the minor universe shifting escape technique did not receive the help of the essence. However, this was his intention. This small supernatural power was evolved from the 5 Elements True Technique by the seniors of the Qinsong school, and it was a supreme skill of protection and concealment. However, the 5 Elements Qi was difficult to pass. Now that he had the 5 Elements True Technique as his foundation, he would not need to put in so much effort to cultivate it in the future. Moreover, the sword competition between the 16 sects was approaching and there was not much time left. Therefore, he did not deliberately cultivate it. Zhang Yan stopped practicing and stood up, exiting the small kettle realm. Sitting in the main hall, he summoned the mirror spirit and asked, "In the past few years, have the disciples been diligent in their cultivation?" The mirror spirit replied respectfully, "Master has ordered all the disciples to sit in the mansion and cultivate diligently." Zhang Yan nodded and asked a few more questions. Only then did he realize that Lu Yin's cultivation had been progressing very quickly these past few years. The 34th meridian was about to be broken through, and it would only take a month or so for him to succeed. He thought for a while and said, "The sect leader once promised me that once my cultivation base reaches the 3rd tier of the core transformation realm, I can use the floating heavenly palace to cultivate for 30 years. After I leave, if Yen Yi comes out of seclusion, tell her to send a letter to me. I will come back and help her refine the medicine and condense the pill." The 30-year deadline was approaching. Time was running out. After the mirror spirit left, Zhang Yan left for the floating heavenly palace. With the help of the sword, he flew at a godly speed. In a short while, he arrived at the heavenly palace and unfolded the talisman. He landed in front of the side hall that he had come to before and told the Taoist boy about his intentions. He only waited for a while in front of the door before calling him in. In the inner hall, sect leader Qin sized him up, waved his horsetail whisk, and said, "Zhang Yan, stand aside first. If something happens later, don't say anything." Zhang Yan felt strange, but he was very shrewd, so he didn't show it on his face. He obeyed and stood in front of the hall. Sect leader Qin didn't say anything. After a while, a middle-aged Taoist entered the main hall. This person wore a moon-white Taoist robe and a 9-sun crown. His eyes were reserved, and his sideburns were slightly white. He was tall, almost as tall as Zhang Yan. At first glance, Zhang Yan felt that this person was very ordinary. However, when he took another look, his eyes narrowed. This person was clearly standing there, but he gave off a mysterious feeling that he was illusory, real, and fake. It was as if he could disappear from the world at any time, leaving no dust behind. When sect leader Qin saw this person, he didn't sit anymore. He stood up and said in a deep voice, "Uncle Master Zhuo, greetings." Elder Zhuo stood with his hands behind his back and said plainly, "I'm not worthy of your greeting, perfected sect leader. I'm here for one thing, and I'll leave after I'm done." Sect leader Qin's expression turned serious and he said, "Uncle Master, please speak." Zhang Yan now knew that this Taoist was the Grand Supreme Elder of the Hall of Duzhen. He couldn't help but look at him a few more times. Elder Zhuo Daoren said, Perfected sect leader, it's against the rules for the floating heavenly palace to be used by our disciples to cultivate. I hope that sect leader will not make such an exception. Sect leader Qin's expression didn't change, and he said, I've already promised my juniors. Since I've said it, how can I go back on my word? Elder Zhu didn't say much. He shook his hand and a golden talisman flew over. He said, I know that perfected sect leader is in a difficult position. Before senior apprentice brother ascended, he left behind a decree. With this, can you take back your order? Sect leader Qin took the talisman and looked at it. He sighed softly and said, with master's decree, how can I not obey? Elder Zhu didn't say anything else. After he cupped his hands in greeting, he waved his sleeves and didn't stay any longer. He turned around and left in a flash. From beginning to end, he didn't say a single word to Zhang Yan. He didn't even look in his direction. Sect leader Qin sat down again. He pondered for a while, then he raised his head and looked at Zhang Yan. He said, Zhang Yan, I'm afraid I can't use the floating heavenly palace for your cultivation anymore. Zhang Yan smiled and said in a clear voice, there are tens of thousands of paths, and there's more than one path. I'm just looking for another way. Sect leader Qin stroked his beard and smiled. His eyes flashed and he said, you don't have to rush. I have a way to help you cultivate yuanying as soon as possible. Zhang Yan's spirit was lifted, and a look of concentration appeared on his face. Sect leader Qin raised his horsetail whisk and pointed outside. He said, 180,000 miles to the west of the East Flower Continent is the Central Pillar Continent. There's a boundary there called Kunyu, which leads directly to the Jiutian realm. There's a strange qi there called the Green Sun Hero. It's rare and difficult to collect. Even if a yuanying cultivator obtains it, it can increase their cultivation. However, with your current cultivation, you can't go there yet. Today, I'll lend you a talisman that can help you absorb this qi. The world was divided into 9 continents. There was a saying, 3 continents in the east, 3 in the west, 1 in the south, and 1 in the north, and 1 in the pillar. This pillar referred to the Central Pillar Continent. This place was the ancestral vein of the 9 continents and the source of the 4 seas. Sect leader Qin flipped his palm, and a bamboo-shaped fish drum that looked like it was carved from black jade flew out. When it landed in his palm, he said, this item is called the hero's knot fish drum. It can condense energy into jade. Back then, Yuntian also received its help. However, the true spirit of this treasure has a strange temperament. Whether you can use it or not will depend on yourself. As soon as he finished speaking, a young Taoist wearing an elegant crown and a broad robe walked out. He raised his head and shouted. He said, Qin Mabai, are you willing to let me out? Zhang Yan took a glance at him and saw that he was quite handsome. However, his actions and tone seemed a little carefree and unrestrained. Sect leader Qin smiled and didn't say anything. He just pointed at Zhang Yan and said, you can go with him. The young Taoist looked at Zhang Yan and said casually, are you the one who wants to collect energy? I'll say this first. I don't have any fighting skills. If we fight with others, don't count on me. Zhang Yan smiled and said, I don't dare to trouble Taoist brother. The young Taoist said loudly, if you want me to help, then you have to give me good wine. I won't do a losing deal. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He looked at sect leader Qin. He saw that sect leader Qin had his eyes closed and didn't say anything. He allowed the two of them to discuss and didn't seem to want to interfere. He thought for a moment and took out a wine pouch from his sleeve and handed it over. The young Taoist took it. He removed the stopper in front of sect leader Qin and sniffed it. Instantly, his face was filled with joy and he said, good wine, good wine. He raised his head and drank a few mouthfuls. His eyes shone brightly and he wanted to drink more. However, he thought about it and held the wine pouch close to his chest. He asked, do you have more? Zhang Yan shook his head and said, this wine isn't easy to brew. I'll find more for Taoist brother. This wine was originally the Yang returning wine that Elder Gong had given him. He still had more, but he didn't give it away anymore. This was to whet the true spirit's appetite. If he obtained it too easily, it wouldn't cherish it. The young Taoist's face was filled with resentment and he muttered, "Not straightforward." Although he said this, his body turned into a ray of clear light and entered the fish drum. Then, the item automatically flew up and landed in Zhang Yan's direction. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and caught the treasure, putting it into his sleeve. Sect leader Qin opened his eyes and said in a low voice, "Zhang Yan, when you go, you need to be careful of that fierce person." That day there was a huge change in the sect. He either lured or tricked us and stole many of our talismans. This heroic section fish drum was one step ahead of me and I managed to stop him. Although his 1,000 years of cultivation had been broken by the North Dark Sword and he must be recuperating somewhere, his disciples are quite capable and might try to rob it. You need to be careful. Zhang Yan's heart trembled. He bowed and said, "Thank you, sect leader, for your advice." Sect leader Qin waved his horsetail whisk and said, "Go." Zhang Yan bowed again and left the floating sky palace. On the way back, he thought about the words and actions of sect leader Qin just now. They all seemed to have a deeper meaning. He couldn't help but think to himself, Elder Zhua coming out to stop him was probably within sect leader's spiritual master's expectations. He guessed that the matter of sect leader spiritual master borrowing his floating sky palace was purposely leaked out. The person who did it was probably Elder Zhua. As for the specific reason, he couldn't think of it. But speaking of which, he obtained a true treasure and didn't suffer a loss. His cultivation level was still low and he couldn't participate in this kind of chess game, so there was no point in thinking too much about it. Thus, he only thought about it twice before he dismissed it with a smile. He activated his Fa Li and like a bolt of lightning, he headed back to the cave. At the same time, on a peak in the Great Lake of Dragon Lake, there were two people standing together. One of them was sect leader Qin and the other was Elder Zhua. "Martial nephew Qin, I've asked for senior brother's decree today, and it can be considered that I've settled one of my worries. I'll be going into closed-door cultivation in a few days, and after I leave, no one will be able to restrain Mabai anymore." Sect leader Qin was shocked and said, "Martial uncle, don't tell me you want to." The handsome Taoist put his hands behind his back and looked at the void. He said, "Back then I could already break the world and leave. The reason why I stayed here for more than 100 years was because senior brother thought that my martial nephew Mabai was planning something big. If he obtained the position of sect leader, he might take that step. At that time, our Qinsong school would be doomed. So, he wanted me to hold the talisman and watch from the side so that I could stop him at the crucial moment. It's just that recently, I have a feeling that if I continue to wait, I'm afraid that I won't have the chance to ascend anymore. Whether I succeed or fail, it's all up to fate. As someone who is about to leave, I won't care about you guys anymore." Sect leader Qin was a little frustrated. She didn't know about the talisman. If she knew about it, she would have planned it carefully. Why would she ask this martial uncle to help her in such a hurry? In her father's generation, Qinsong school was already at its peak. There were at least 3 people in the sect who had the potential to break the world and ascend. For a time, its reputation was immeasurable. Even Shaoqing's sect was overshadowed. Not only that, there were even a few extraordinary people among the younger generation. But for some reason, her father didn't say who would inherit the position of sect leader and ascended. After he left, a few disciples under him got into a dispute. It went on for dozens of years, but there was still no sect leader. At that time, the current sect leader, Qin Mabai, was ranked last. All the senior brothers fought for the position, but he didn't say anything. So, no one thought highly of him. But in the end, he used brilliant methods and allied with the aristocratic families to suppress the few senior brothers. If he didn't imprison them, he would expel them and seize the position of sect leader. After going through this huge change in the sect, Qinsong School's strength was also greatly reduced. Even the land of 3 pools that was close to them was lost. And now, the master and disciple faction regained control of the situation. Not only did they regain the 3 pools, but a small half of the Grotto Heaven spiritual masters in the sect came from this sect leader. The only one who could restrain him was this Elder Zhua. Sect leader Qin thought about it repeatedly. She believed that sect leader's senior brother should have known about the talisman long ago, So he used the matter of Zhang Yan to lure her to invite this martial uncle. And Elder Zhua had long wanted to leave. It was just that he couldn't leave because of the promise he made in the past. Now that she had invited him, he could take advantage of the situation and end this matter. Once this elder left, there would be no one to suppress sect leader Qin. Thinking of this, sect leader Qin couldn't help but grit her teeth and said, "Senior brother, you really are a good schemer." Chapter 427. When Zhang Yan returned to Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake, it was already afternoon. Seeing that he returned so quickly, the mirror spirit was a little puzzled, but seeing that there was no emotion on his face, she didn't dare to ask more. She just came up to him obediently and asked if there was anything for him to do. Zhang Yan only said, "If Yenny comes out, quickly report to me." Then, he flicked his sleeves and stepped into the small pot mirror. At this moment he had already thought it through. He only needed to wait for his eldest disciple to come out of seclusion and help him condense his core. Then, he would go to Middle Pillar Divine Continent to collect green Yanggang Qi and see if he could step into Yuanying state within 30 years. The bamboo building in the small pot mirror was destroyed by his fire elemental true light earlier. However, this world had formed its own heaven and earth and could transform into all kinds of things. With just a thought, this building was pulled up from the air again and was still standing in the middle of the bamboo forest. He stepped into the air and entered the building in a blink of an eye. Then, he sat on the couch and with a thought, a series of mysterious spells appeared in front of him. This was the supernatural power of the 5 elements escape method. He didn't have time to cultivate it previously, so now he could study it. He reached into his sleeves and held the jade remnant, his mind sinking into it as usual. After an unknown period of time, on this day, the mirror spirit came to report, "Master, Lun Yangzi came out of seclusion and is waiting outside." Zhang Yan withdrew his mind from the jade remnant, opened his eyes and said, "Call her in." After a while, Lu Yenny entered the mirror. Today, she had changed into a white robe and used a soft silver rope to tie her fine black hair. Her jade-like bones and ice-like skin were revealed, and her beautiful eyes were bright and clear. She was elegant and pure, like a white lotus. Her cultivation seemed to be even purer than before. She came in front of Zhang Yan. She bowed gracefully and said, "Disciple greets teacher." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Yenny, no need to stand on ceremony, stand up and talk." Lu Yenny made a sound and bowed again before standing up. Zhang Yan looked at her again, nodded and asked, "How many acupoints have you opened now?" Lu Yenny replied, "Your disciple is slow-witted and has failed to live up to master's expectations. So far, I have only opened 34 points." Even with the incantation given by Zhang Yan, she still felt that it was extremely difficult towards the end. Especially the last 3 acupoints, they were extremely difficult to open. No matter how hard she tried, it was still difficult to break through them. Being able to open 34 acupoints was already extremely lucky. The moment the acupoints were opened, she had a vague feeling of enlightenment. He could only stop here. He didn't want to waste any more time and immediately cut off his obsession, ending his seclusion. Zhang Yan comforted her, "Disciple, it's not easy for you to cultivate to this stage. Don't belittle yourself. Do you want to try again?" Lu Yenny took a deep breath and shook her head. "No, disciple can sense that the time to condense the core has come, and I don't want to miss it." When a cultivator's cultivation reached a certain level, she would be able to sense the qi activity that was connected to her own fortune and misfortune. Sometimes, it was just a very small thought, and it would be over after a moment of carelessness. Only those who were born with a deep foundation and extraordinary temperament could be as calm as Lu Yenny. Only then could she do it. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He said to the mirror spirit beside him, "Go and invite spiritual master Lu to the main hall." After the mirror spirit bowed, she accepted the order and left. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve again. Lu Yenny only felt the scene in front of her changed, and she found that she had been brought to the main hall. After a while, Lu Mainyang arrived. She bowed and said, "I greet Manor Master. May I know why you summoned I?" Zhang Yan got up and returned the greeting. "Today, I called you here because I want to invite you to God Crossing Peak. Lu Mainyang immediately understood what Zhang Yan meant. He wanted her to go and get the Chuejue Thunder and the Rezungyan Marrow. After obtaining these two items, she must condense the core within 10 days. Otherwise, the thunder aura would disperse. Thus, she needed to go and get it before condensing the core. Just now. However, there was a deeper meaning in asking her to go and get it. She naturally understood it. She said cheerfully, "Since fellow Taoist Zhang has ordered, I will help. I will go now." After she finished speaking, she cupped her hands and walked out of the mansion with a gust of astral wind. These two medicines were actually not rare. For example, big sects like Chinsong School also had a lone peak north of Longyan Marsh to attract demonic birds to bathe in thunder. However, in the current world, the ones produced by Shinto Peak were still the best. Zhang Yan had high hopes for Lu Yeni. There was no room for failure. Thus, the quality of these two medicines was extremely demanding. Lu Mainyang was a Yuanying spiritual master. She came and went quickly. In less than 5 days, she had to return. When she arrived at the hall and saw Zhang Yan, she raised her finger and made a cut on her wrist. She forced out a few drops of blood essence. She took out a jade bottle and dripped them into it. Then, she took out a golden plate and handed it to Zhang Yan. This blood essence was formed from her bathing in thunder. Especially since she was also a bird, it was far better than the refined marrow in the bones of ordinary demonic birds. The Chuejue thunder in the golden plate was personally drawn by her. These two medicines were much better than what Zhang Yan found in the past. Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves and brought Lu Yeni back into the small pot mirror. He handed the jade bottle and the golden plate to her and said in a deep voice, "Disciple, since you have already sensed it, there is no time to lose. You can now turn the medicine into a pill. I will personally protect you." Lu Yeni's expression turned solemn and said, "Yes, master." She sat down slowly. She held her breath and adjusted her qi. After only half a day, her expression was calm and peaceful. Her state of mind was stable. Zhang Yan nodded. His lips moved and he told her the key points to condense the pill. With his guidance and protection, Lu Yeni's process of condensing the pill was very smooth. She did not make a single mistake. After 12 hours, she felt a surge of spiritual qi rushing to her head. Her blood qi was agitated. Her delicate face had an additional red color, like a red branch moistened by rain. There was a surge of qi in her chest. She opened her mouth slightly and wanted to let out a long cry. Then, she heard Zhang Yan's voice beside her ear, "Yeni, quickly restrain your spiritual qi." Lu Yan did as she was told, and it took a while for her to return to normal. At this time, she opened her eyes and looked down. Inside her body, she saw a golden core shining with a bright golden light. Clear qi circulated around it, and it was as if clouds were rising, shining brilliantly. After cultivating for so many years, she had finally condensed the pill. She could not help but be immersed in joy. After a while, she came back to her senses and knelt to Zhang Yan and said, "Thank you, master, for protecting me." Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled, "What a pity. You're only one step away from becoming a first-grade pill like me." He was originally thinking if he would be able to assist this disciple to ascend to the peak by providing guidance. But unfortunately, it seemed like the will of the heavens had obstructed him since a long time ago, and he was still slightly lacking in the end and was unable to attain a perfect state. Lu Yeni kowtowed again and said, "Disciple is already satisfied. I don't dare to ask for more." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That's good too. There is no need to blindly follow behind me." He had condensed a first-grade pill. The path ahead was opened by himself. Although it was suitable for him, it might not be suitable for his disciple. There was no lack of people who had condensed a second-grade pill in Chinsong School. There were many techniques of the predecessors that could be used for reference. To Lu Yeni, this might be a good thing. Zhang Yan pondered for a while and said, "Disciple, now that you have condensed your pill, this cave abode will be left to you to manage. Master will make a trip to Central Pillar Divine Continent to find a chance to break through." Lu Yeni lowered her head and said, Disciples' cultivation is shallow and cannot accompany you. I can only wish Master a smooth journey." Zhang Yan was about to say something when he suddenly sensed something. He immediately rose and left clear nether heavenly lake in an instant. He raised his head and looked towards the horizon. He saw a strange scene. There were shocking divine essence chi piercing through the 9 heavens and straight into the clouds. The momentum was magnificent and could be said to be incomparably magnificent. Such a phenomenon could be seen even from tens of thousands of li away. Almost at the same time, in the Donghua continent, whether it was the 10 great mystic sects or the 6 great demon sects, all cultivators sensed it. The 10 grotto heavens of the sect were all sitting in the cave abode. Some had complicated expressions, some were silent, some were deep in thought, and some were full of energy. Ever since Qinsong school became independent, apart from the sect master and ancestral master, the number of people who had ascended could be counted on one hand. Now, there was going to be one more. They were also extremely disappointed. This elder Zhua had taken care of them, the juniors. Back then, with this person and the previous sect master overseeing the Azure Sea, the two of them had looked down on the world and looked down upon all. Several hundred years ago, even the Shaoqing sect had no one who could compare to them, but now, they had both ascended. Not only them, but all the disciples of Qinsong school also sensed this change. At this moment, Qi Yuntian, who was sitting in the Xianshui True Palace, suddenly opened his eyes. He thought for a while and then went back to meditation. Huaxian walked out of the cave abode in the 10 Peaks mountain and looked up at the sky. His eyes were bright, and no one knew what he was thinking. Thousands of miles away, Ning Chongxian, dressed in a green robe, stood on a lonely peak. His sleeves fluttered in the wind. He looked at the void with a cold expression. A magic sword beside him made a soft sound, as if it would fly away at any time. In the glittering grotto heaven, Immortal Qin let out a long sigh. Zhong Muqing said softly, "Immortal, Hall Master Zhua has ascended. This is great news." Immortal Qin shook his head and did not say anything. At this moment, a girl suddenly came to report and said, "Immortal, there is someone outside the cave abode asking to see you. He said an old friend is visiting." "Old friend?" Immortal Qin frowned. Then she changed her mind and suddenly looked surprised. She said, "Invite him in." After a while, a young man in a coarse shirt, a bamboo hat, and a pair of straw shoes walked in. His face was like a full moon, and his eyes were bright. After entering the cave abode, he bowed to Immortal Qin and said, "Senior sister, it's been a long time." Zhong Muqing did not recognize this person, but when she heard him call Immortal Qin, senior sister, she was secretly surprised and secretly guessed his identity. Immortal Qin looked at him and was overjoyed. "Junior brother Shin, it's really you. When did you come back?" The young man smiled and said, "Just now for an hour. Master just now said a few words before he ascended." Immortal Qin could not help but sigh. Junior brother Shin looked at her and said, "Before Master ascended, he asked me to tell you that things are different now. If you can let go, then let go." Immortal Qin forced a smile and sighed. "But I can't let go just because you say so." Junior brother Shin shrugged and said, "I'm just passing on Master's words. As for what senior sister thinks, I can't." Immortal Qin laughed. "Junior brother, you still have such a temper. I wonder where you have been all these years?" Junior brother Shin was elder Zhua's direct disciple. It was just that he traveled outside all year round. He had cultivated for more than 700 years, but the time he stayed in the sect was less than a year. Junior brother Shin smiled and said, "For the matter of the 3 great tribulations, I followed Master's orders and crossed the ocean to travel to the Dongxing continent. I explored the geography and looked for opportunities along the way." Immortal Qin became interested and said, "Oh? How is that place compared to the Donghua continent?" Junior brother Shin shook his head and said, "It's far from the Donghua continent. Don't look at the hundreds of sects, but at most there are 5 that can be compared to the 16 sections. However, this is also because there are very few spirit eyes there." Immortal Qin looked at him and knew that he was still in the Yuanying realm. He could not help but feel a little pity and said, "Junior brother, your talent is extremely high. Why are you still in the Yuanying realm? Junior brother Shen smiled and said lightly, I'll leave it to fate. Immortal Qin looked at his confident look and thought that he seemed to have something to rely on. She remembered that he had seen Elder Zhuo just now and thought of something, but she did not point it out. Her expression instantly relaxed a little, and her beautiful eyes flashed. She said, Junior brother, although Uncle Master has left, with you coming back to help me, I won't be alone anymore. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 428. Zhang Yan used an hour to pack up. Then he brought Mountain River Child out of the cave abode. He would not be able to return for 20 to 30 years. Under the lead of Lu Yenni, his disciples came out to send him off. After giving some instructions, he rode a cloud and flew towards the west. The Middle Pillar Divine Continent was located among the 9 continents. Other than the local sects, many cultivators from other continents came and went here. Among them, the vagrant cultivators of the unorthodox sects were the most. They even formed alliances and helped each other. But no matter which one it was, they were 1,000 times more wary of the cultivators from the big sects from other continents. This was because this place was different from other places. It was rich in resources, and there were as many objects for cultivation as the stars in the sky. There were many cave abodes and temples left by the ancient cultivators, but there were very few spiritual caves. Big sects like the 3 big sects of Donghuan never had one. Only a few sects like the Li Mountain sect had one. They understood the logic of a man's wealth getting him into trouble. If it was a vagrant cultivator, it would be fine. But if the disciples of the big sects of Xianmen had ill intentions and attracted the powerful cultivators of their own sects, they would probably invade their interests. Although Zhang Yan had no intention of getting into conflict with the sects of this continent, according to Mountain River Child, Kunyu was not a place without a master hundreds of years ago. There would probably be some twists and turns. He traveled for more than a month and a deep abyss appeared in front of him. A wide river lay in front of him, rushing below. From time to time, there would be waves that were dozens of feet high. White foam splattered and ice beads danced. It was a spectacular sight. This river was called the Time River. It was the boundary between 2 continents. After crossing this river, it would be where the Middle Pillar Divine Continent was. He looked ahead. He saw a towering shadow in front of him. It was shaped like a wall, towering into the clouds, but it was continuous like a wall. From north to south, it stretched to the end of the horizon. Although Zhang Yan had seen many descriptions of this continent in geography books, he was still amazed when he saw such a magnificent scene with his own eyes. The weather above the Time River was unpredictable. Suddenly, there was the sound of thunder. The torrential rain poured down, and suddenly the clouds parted. The sky was clear for 10,000 li. There were still dragons swimming and playing in the river, and the danger here was not much inferior to the open sea. To avoid trouble, Zhang Yan summoned the Qi Dragon ship and flew across the sea. This time, he was going to the Middle Pillar region alone. To avoid any accidents, he had brought his flying Starwheel Palace as well. However, this item was too ostentatious. Now that he had left the Donghua continent, he was not willing to use it unless it was a critical moment. He used his fiendish core to control his qi and fly. However, his speed wasn't slow either. He flew day and night, and in less than 20 days, he crossed the river and arrived at the border of the Central Pillar State. However, because this continent was higher than the other 8 continents, he still needed to go to the cloud sky. After flying upward for about 9 days, he still couldn't see the end of the road. According to what the Mountain River Child had said, the Central Pillar Continent was a sky-piercing pillar that faced the East Flower Continent. The peak of the pillar led to the top of the sky, and it was surrounded by stellar energy. He needed to find a path to enter the belly of the mountain before he could find the path to the center of the continent. However, several hundred years had passed since the last time the Mountain River Child had come here. The landscape of the mountains and rivers had changed a lot. Zhang Yan searched for a long time, but he still couldn't find the way. At this moment, his sleeve shook, and the fish drum true spirit came out. He sniffed around and took a deep breath. In the end, he showed an intoxicated expression and said, "Good wine, good wine." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There's no one here, so where can I find good wine?" The fish-drum true spirit pointed at his nose and said, "Martial nephew Zhang, you don't know that this treasure of mine can smell good wine even from 1,000 li away." He grabbed Zhang Yan's sleeve and said, "If we don't go quickly, we might miss it." Zhang Yan saw the fish-drum true spirit scratching his ears and cheeks, looking like he couldn't wait any longer. He couldn't help but find it funny and said, "It won't take up much time anyway, I'll do as you say." The fish-drum true spirit immediately beamed with joy. It pointed to the heavens and swore that it would gather more stellar energy for him and so on. Zhang Yan shook his head with a smile and waved his sleeve. He had said this a dozen times along the way, and he could only hope that the fish-drum true spirit would really work hard. The fish-drum true spirit was overjoyed after receiving his promise. He immediately turned into a light and flew away. After traveling for 100 li, he saw a caravan in front of him. There were more than 300 horses and more than 50 carriages, and they were moving forward on the steep mountain path that was like a long snake. He cried out in joy and jumped onto the carriage. With a wave of his hand, a jar of good wine that was tied up flew into his hand automatically. He removed the clay seal and took a deep breath before pouring it into his mouth impatiently. Among the caravan, a man who looked like a steward suddenly saw a young Taoist with disheveled hair appear in front of him. He actually snatched the good wine that his family needed to offer to the Tao Palace and was even drinking it as if there was no one else around him. He was instantly enraged and shouted, "Where did this wild Taoist come from? What are you waiting for? Hurry up and take him down." He didn't see where the fish-drum true spirit appeared from, but there were some youths in the mountains who liked to climb the walls and steal goods by swinging down vines. This was a common occurrence, so he didn't think too much about it and immediately ordered his men to take action. Those servants and guards were all very experienced. There were 3 to 5 of them at the front, holding long rods and randomly poking at the fish-drum true spirit. One of them took out a rope and waited for the fish-drum true spirit to be chased down so that he could be tied up. Behind them, there were even a few youths who were rubbing their palms together excitedly. They were ready to kiss Xia Ho and treat him well. However, when the rods passed over, they actually passed through the fish-drum true spirit's body as if they were illusions and couldn't touch his body at all. Everyone was shocked and someone exclaimed, "Could it be that we've seen a ghost in broad daylight?" That steward was rather knowledgeable and immediately felt that something was wrong. He pulled a manservant over and said a few words before stopping the crowd. He went forward and cupped his hands, saying, "I wonder which temple this Taoist is cultivating in? My master's surname is Wang and he has some friendly relations with the King Song residents." The fish-drum true spirit only cared about drinking a jar of wine first and patted his shriveled belly that didn't change at all. He said with a mischievous smile, "I don't know who this King Song is. If you want wine money, just look for him." He stretched out his hand and pointed. Everyone turned around and saw that a handsome young Taoist had appeared beside them. Beside him was a delicate and pretty Taoist child. The Taoist had an extraordinary bearing and gave off an indescribable pressure just by standing there. That steward unconsciously took a step back. He was a little bewildered. Zhang Yan took out a jade box from his sleeve and passed it to Mountain River Child at the side. The latter went forward and passed the box to the steward, saying, "My master said that this item is to be used as payment for the wine." The steward saw that these 3 people had come in a strange manner and seemed to have some Taoist techniques in their hands, so he didn't dare to accept it easily. Just as he was hesitating, someone said from afar, "What's the value of some wine? It's my honor that Celestial Master is willing to give me face." Zhang Yan looked toward the source of the voice and saw a woman about 27 or 28 years old walking over. Her facial features were exquisite and her eyes revealed some experience and shrewdness. She was wearing a pink cloak, and when she came over, everyone made way for her. It was obvious that she had a high status in the caravan. When the woman arrived in front of them, she said with a smile, "We are all citizens of Song. This trip is to deliver goods to the capital, and there is only one path that leads into the mountain within 1,000 miles. If the two Taoists don't mind, why don't you follow the caravan into the mountain? If we encounter any mountain spirits or monsters, I hope that you can protect us." She stretched out her slender finger. She pointed at the jars of wine and said, "If the two of you agree, I can offer all these wines." In this mountain, there were many monsters and monsters. When the caravan traveled, it was extremely dangerous. When the caravan traveled, those with a deep foundation would usually hire Taoists from the Tao Palace to protect them, but the price was quite high. There were also some Taoists who would specially wait by the roadside when they were traveling, eating from the caravan while appearing to block disasters for the caravan. It was obvious that this woman treated Zhang Yan and Yu Gu as such Taoists. Yu Gu's eyes lit up. Then, it looked at Zhang Yan eagerly and said, "Martial nephew Zhang, there's good wine here." "Why not, why not?" Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. If he had to find a way into the mountain and blend in with these caravans, he could avoid a lot of accidents. He could agree, so he nodded slowly. Yu Gu was overjoyed. He winked at the woman and said, "How should I address you, little lady? Are you betrothed to me?" Everyone heard the teasing in his words and glared at him. The woman didn't mind it at all. She smiled and said, "My husband's surname is Wang. The two Taoists can just call me Wang." She waved her hand and called the steward over. "Prepare 2 good carriages for the two Taoists, don't neglect them." The steward quickly acknowledged. Madame Wang then said to Zhang Yan and Yu Gu with a smile, "If the two Taoists need anything, just call Steward Chiu. I'll take my leave for now." After saying that, she bowed and turned around to leave. When Madame Wang returned to her carriage, she saw a white-haired steward leaning on a crutch waiting there. When he saw her, he walked over shakily and bowed. "Madam." Madame Wang supported him and frowned. "The mountain road is dangerous. Steward Wu is old, why aren't you sitting in the carriage?" Her jade-like face stiffened as she glared at the people beside her and scolded, "What are you all doing?" Steward Wu quickly said, "It's not their business, it's this old man who has something to discuss with Madam." Madame Wang sighed. "Steward Wu is an old man in my family. If there's anything, you can just send someone to inform me and I'll come over myself. Why do you need to come personally?" The old steward looked worried. "Madam, the 10 batches of Guang tea and 100 baskets of spring fruit are needed by Huiju Taoist Palace. They're worth tens of thousands of gold taels, we can't afford to lose any of them." Madame Wang understood the meaning of his words. She glanced at him and said, "Steward Wu, are you worried that the two Taoists are not from the right path?" The old steward nodded and said, "The two of them are strange, we have to be careful." Madame Wang's expression did not change. She looked down and said, "Steward Wu, you're worrying too much. If the two of them had malicious intentions, they could have done it immediately. There's no need to make such a fuss. Moreover, don't we have the Taoist palace protectors you hired? What's there to be afraid of?" Steward Wu tried to persuade Madame Wang a few more times, but seeing that Madame Wang insisted on her own opinion and refused to chase them away, he could only sigh sorrowfully and return to his carriage. When he reached his carriage, he pulled open the curtain and saw a vigorous middle-aged man of about 40 years old sitting upright inside. His eyes were spirited, his joints were thick, and his bearing was extraordinary. Steward Wu hurriedly paid his respects and said, "Greetings, Commander Qi." The middle-aged man glanced at him and asked, "How is it?" Steward Wu said hatefully, "The two Taoists seem to have some skills. The little girl knows how to take advantage of the situation, I wonder who she learned it from." The middle-aged man said, "They're just 2 wild Taoists, they won't be a hindrance. We'll just take care of them at the same time." To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 429. The road to Song country was hidden deep inside the mountain. After the caravan passed through a lush ancient forest, they entered a cave wall under the guidance of a horse that knew the way. The cave was interconnected and had thousands of ravines. Without someone who knew the way to lead the way, it would be very difficult to find the right path. The caravan moved along the winding path and it was drizzling at this moment. The men were all wearing straw raincoats and holding bamboo hats in their hands. A few of the women of the caravan entered the carriage to hide, while others held up oil paper umbrellas with patterns of flowers, birds, fishes, and insects. Under the green bamboo umbrellas, there were bright and beautiful brocade dresses that swayed along with their footsteps. In an instant, it was alluring and beautiful. There was a carriage with 8 horses in the caravan. At this moment, the curtain was suddenly lifted and the Yugu true spirit poked its head out. It looked from the front to the back with great interest and winked at them from time to time, which even made a few women giggle. Zhang Yan shook his head slightly. That Madame Wang had originally prepared a carriage for each of them, but these days, whenever this Yugu true spirit met a beautiful woman, he would go up to chat and tease her. Unfortunately, he had a good appearance, which attracted the hearts of many women. There was even a married woman who had sent over a bamboo book. Only now did Zhang Yan understand why Sect Master Qin didn't release this magic treasure. It was because he kept it by his side to prevent it from causing trouble. Fortunately, this carriage was extremely spacious and could seat 5 to 6 people. The interior was also comfortable and exquisite. There were gold and silver utensils and toiletries. Beside the carriage was a golden cage with golden wires. Inside the cage was a golden pheasant that could ward off evil and report the time. It was fed by someone every day. From these small details, one could see that it was indeed true to say that Middle Pillar Continent was the richest land in the 9 continents. The Yugu true spirit looked at it for a while longer and felt bored. It retreated back into the carriage and leaned lazily on the thick cushion. Wine never left his hand. He took the wine pot and poured a mouthful of sweet and mellow wine. Smacking his lips, he suddenly turned around and said, "Mountain River child, no wonder you said this Middle Pillar Divine Continent is a land of wealth and gentleness. Just by looking at the luxurious clothing in a prosperous place, you can tell that it's not something that an ordinary citizen of the Donghua continent can afford." Since ancient times, there were very few people who could ascend to the Tao in the Pillar Divine state. Many cultivators knew that it was difficult to reach the Tao, so they all enjoyed life and happiness. In this continent, the nobles, generals, and ministers used gold, pearls, jade, and other external objects to win over cultivators, such as Qi, Song, and Wei. These countries with strong national strength, every year they have to mobilize millions of people to chop mountains and chisel stones, cut down forests to open roads, build temples and monasteries on dangerous mountains and precipitous cliffs, and worship incense. It was as if other places were abusing the power of the people. Since a long time ago, the land here was fertile and the natural resources were abundant. Moreover, there were few weapons and soldiers. That was why it could sustain such a huge consumption. Along the way, the caravan had already seen a few beautifully decorated temples with richly ornamented beams and painted rafters. Every time they approached, waves of zither music and the sound of bells would resound from within. Those who heard it would be so happy that they forgot about their worries. Such a fertile land was the easiest to wear down one's willpower. Cultivators were also like nobles and princes, wearing brocade and jade robes all day, traveling in carriages and listening to music. They were extremely extravagant, and most of them were deeply immersed in the web of the mortal world. They couldn't extricate themselves. Zhang Yan heard the words of the fish drum true spirit, and it seemed like it had been to many places before. Thinking that he still didn't know its background, he asked, "I still haven't asked, which ancestor did Uncle Master follow back then?" The fish drum true spirit put down the wine pot and wiped the corner of its mouth with its sleeve. It chuckled and said proudly, "Martial nephew, listen carefully. I was refined by the 3rd-generation sect Master Yuan Zhongzi. After I obtained my true consciousness, I was repeatedly refined by the 2 generations of sect masters, and finally ended up in the hands of the current sect Master Qin. Just now, I've given birth to a true spirit." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows in surprise. He didn't think that this fish drum of valor actually had such a great background. He had also heard from Zhou Chongju that the founder of Qinsong School was Master Tai Ming, but he wasn't a person of the 9 continents. He came from beyond the heavens, and after he established Qinsong School, he disappeared after 100 years. The 2nd-generation sect master was originally his attendant boy, who was now the ancestor of the Chen clan. The third-generation sect master, Yuan Zhongzi, was the first disciple of the great underworld spiritual master. He was the one who had truly established the foundation of the Dark Azure sect, and was also one of the ancestral masters who had broken through the realm and ascended. With this calculation, this fish drum of valor had already passed through the hands of 4 generations of sect masters, and its aptitude was far beyond his imagination. But he didn't know why the successive sect masters would refine such a magic treasure that couldn't be used for fighting or killing. In his heart, Zhang Yan didn't believe that they didn't have a purpose, but with his current cultivation he still didn't know the secret. At this moment he heard someone shouting from outside, "The rain has stopped." Zhang Yan didn't want to sit in the carriage for a long time, so he got off the carriage. After the light rain, there was a slight dampness. The air in the ravine was smooth, and the warm wind blew, and the sound of birds and insects could be heard in the ethereal valley. At this moment he didn't know how deep into the mountain, but he could faintly hear the sound of clear spring water, and the rocks were wet with moss. At the corner of the road, because the rain and mist had dispersed, there were still colorful, illusory, and glittering lights shining brightly. After another half an hour, he arrived at an open land. He saw a smooth and flat towering stone wall, in which there were niches, and there were more than 1,000 stone statues. Among them, there was a particularly tall stone statue, hidden in the wall of the shrine. It was exquisitely carved, and its face was lifelike, like a real person. Zhang Yan noticed that although there weren't any formations here, there weren't any broken branches or leaves on the stone statue. Even in some of the dark corners, there wasn't any filth. It was obvious that there were people who cleaned it often. At this moment, there was a commotion in the group, and many people left the group. They ran forward, knelt down, and burned the statues, prayed, and worshipped. They looked very sincere. Zhang Yan waved his hand and called Steward Qiu to his side. He pointed at him and asked, "Which perfected one is worshipping here?" Steward Qiu cupped his hands and said seriously, "Celestial Master, this is Lai Xian Sect's ancestor, Venerable Iya." Steward Qiu pointed at the surroundings and said, "In the past, Venerable Iya came here to cultivate, and he took a fancy to this place. He cultivated here for more than 500 years, and in the end, he saw through the mystery and became an immortal. Back then, demons ran amok in this place, and he and his disciple protected the living. The people were grateful, and they built a statue to worship him. Now, there's Iya Temple in Hanjing of the country of Song. It's filled with incense, and it's very effective. This person is also an immortal of the Tao sect. Why don't you go and pay your respects to him?" The Yugu true spirit pouted and said, "What immortal? There has never been a person who ascended in the middle pillar state. If we go by lifespan, I think he's too young to call me grandpa." Steward Qiu was shocked, and he said, "Sir, it's fine to say this here, but if you go to Hanjing, you must not blaspheme this immortal. In the country of Song, most of them are this immortal's disciples." He looked left and right again, then lowered his voice and said, "Even the carriage guards in the caravan, there are many disciples from the Lai Xian sect." At this moment, Zhang Yan saw some of the disciples taking out a book and reading it. He pointed at it and asked, "What book is that?" Steward Qiu took a look and said, "This is the Tao scripture that Venerable Iya wrote that day." Tao scripture? Zhang Yan raised his brows. There were many cultivators in the world, but to directly refer to his own writings as Tao scripture was something that even the great cultivators of the past did not dare to do. Thus, he said, "Let me take a look." Steward Qiu quickly fetched it and handed it to Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan took a few glances at it and smiled, then he passed it to the Yugu true spirit. The Yugu true spirit also took a few glances at it. It sneered and said, "And here I was wondering how great it was. Turns out it's just a hodgepodge of over 100 Tao scriptures to deceive the ignorant." Steward Qiu's face turned pale, and he quickly looked around. When he saw that no one heard him, he finally relaxed. Zhang Yan put his hands behind his back and said, "Venerable Iya is the founder of a sect, so he shouldn't be so shallow, nor would he be so arrogant. It might be a fake." The Yugu true spirit agreed, It's most likely. Venerable Iya did have a lot of disciples, but Zhang Yan had seen them. Among this caravan, more than half of them were here to offer incense. After offering their prayers for 2 hours, the caravan just now, they were back on the road again. However, they didn't go far when they heard a commotion in front of them. The caravan stopped, and this alerted Madame Wang, who was at the back. She got off the carriage with her 2 maids. She found a guard and asked, "What happened?" The guard said fearfully, "The ropeway on the cliff in front has been cut off for some reason, there's no way out." Madame Wang frowned and said, "Bring me there." The guard quickly led the way, and after walking for less than 200 steps, they saw that the ropeway that was originally connected by iron chains had been cut off, and they could vaguely see the opposite cliff. Below them was a ravine that was tens of thousands of feet long, and unless they flew in the air, it was impossible to cross it. Madame Wang was extremely daring. She stood at the edge of the cliff for a while and suddenly said, "Find a few people to drag the iron chains up." Not long after, dozens of people came and dragged the iron chains up. Madame Wang walked forward and carefully looked at the cut. Seeing that the cut was neat, it was obvious that it was cut by a sharp divine weapon. She immediately knew that someone did it on purpose. However, on the surface, she did not show it. She instructed the people to put down the iron chains, and returned to the caravan. At this moment, she saw Steward Wu rushing over with the help of a crutch. He said while panting, "Madam, I heard that the iron chains are broken? How can this be? How can this be?" Madame Wang sighed and said, "Perhaps it was the doing of the demons in the mountains, but now it's difficult. My knowledge is shallow, but the old steward is experienced and knowledgeable, and is familiar with the roads in the mountains. I wonder if there's another way to Shangjing?" Steward Wu stroked his beard and pondered for a moment before he said, "If this road is blocked, we'll have to take a detour and take a shortcut out of the low-lying valley to reach the mainland." However, a Taoist priest Jikong came to the low-lying valley 2 years ago and took in a few disciples. He also abducted thousands of peasants and built a Taoist temple there. Usually, he collects money from the temple, but I heard that his disciples are black-hearted and ruthless. They demand at least 70% of the money. If we head in that direction, Madame Wang said decisively, money can be earned again, but the goods must be delivered. If we offend the palace, not only will we be in trouble, we will also implicate our children and relatives. Steward Wu could only sigh repeatedly and kept saying, "Fate, fate." Madame Wang returned to the carriage. After entering the carriage, her expression was solemn. Ever since her husband and father-in-law passed away, this was the first time she led a caravan to this place. However, she had asked around beforehand. Other than the cableway at the Ghost Cliff, there were 2 other roads leading to the Kingdom of Song. However, Steward Wu only said one and did not say anything. There must be something wrong. Earlier, she already felt that Steward Wu's actions were suspicious. Now, she was even more certain. She could also imagine that even if she just now suggested taking the other road, if Steward Wu had any arrangements, he would not have missed it. She could be considered a heroine among women. She did not panic when faced with trouble and kept thinking of countermeasures in her mind. Not long after, she raised her head and called for a maidservant. "Invite the 2 Taoists over." Without waiting for the maidservant to leave, she suddenly stood up and stopped the maidservant. She said, "Wait, it's better for me to go personally." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 430. Madame Wang got off the carriage and walked a few steps. A servant girl beside her suddenly looked terrified. She pointed upwards and exclaimed, "Madam, look!" Madame Wang raised her head to take a look and was shocked. On both sides of the cliff, there were more than 10 black-furred ape demons. They were climbing vines and hanging ropes, staring at the crowd. One of the ape demons was abnormally burly. Its body was covered with dense hair and its muscles were extremely thick. It was obvious that it was the leader of the demons. Above its head, there were wisps of cloud-shaped spiritual qi. This was a sign that it was about to transform into a human. He looked at Madame Wang, and as if he was a human, his eyes revealed a lustful look, and he cried out excitedly. Following his cry, the ape demons also let out shrill cries, and the noise made everyone feel dizzy and their ears ringing and their hearts flustered. Everyone's expression changed. The guards of the caravan also picked up their weapons and stood with their backs against the carriage. They looked extremely nervous. The other apes were easy to deal with, but this ape king was so ferocious. If all of them rushed down together, it would be difficult to deal with. After the ape king cried out, it leaped down from the cliff and landed not far away from Madame Wang. Someone shouted, "Protect the madam." Lady Wang was immediately surrounded by more than 20 family guards. They held a spear in one hand and formed a shield formation, protecting her and the two maids in the middle. Facing the ape demons, they did not dare to be careless. Without hesitation, they bit the secret medicine given by the Taoist palace. A bitter taste went down their throat. In an instant, they were 100 times more spirited. Their faces were flushed and they let out low sounds. Because of the abundance of spiritual qi in the middle pillar state. There were many demons and monsters in the mountain. If they did not have something to rely on, how would they dare to walk here? Therefore, the guards of the caravan were prepared with the secret medicine made by the Lai Xian order. With just one divine power pill, one would be able to have 5 times the strength of one's own in a moment. They could fight with demons and monsters. Although it was Madame Wang's first time leading a caravan, she was surprised to see a demon. Not only was she not afraid, she even said loudly, "Thank you for your protection. After defeating the ape demons, each of you will be rewarded with a silver ingot. I will not go back on my words." Hearing this, the guards were excited. A person who looked like the leader shouted, "Did you all hear that? Madam has given a reward. If anyone dares not to put in the effort, they will be punished. Just wait and see how I'll deal with him when we get back." These guards were very experienced in dealing with spiritual monsters. The shield formation was also very strong. The ape king tried to rush in a few times, but it was still unable to enter. At this moment, he suddenly heard a loud shout from behind. A figure jumped out and punched the back of its neck. Although the ape king's body was big, it was abnormally agile. It turned around and used its arms to block the attack. With a muffled sound, both he and the figure took a few steps back. Just now, everyone could clearly see that the person who had attacked was a burly middle-aged man. However, above his head, there was a talisman floating in the air, releasing a stream of clear air from time to time. They hung down like tassels and enveloped his entire body, making him seem mighty and extraordinary. Someone exclaimed, "It's Captain Qi." The man and the ape confronted each other for a while. The ape demon seemed to know that it couldn't win against this person, so it roared a few times to demonstrate its strength. Then, it took a few steps back and suddenly leaped towards the cliff. It turned around and roared again. Pulling the vine rope, it swayed a few times and disappeared. The apes also retreated. Everyone in the caravan let out a sigh of relief and praised, "Captain Qi is really capable." Captain Qi laughed loudly and turned around to look at Madame Wang. He cupped his fists and said, "Madam, you must have been frightened." Madame Wang raised her wrist and said, "Someone, give Captain Qi 2 gold ingots. Other than the silver just now, give everyone another 20 strings of coins." She bowed to Captain Qi and said, "We still need to rely on Captain Qi in the future." Captain Qi waved his hand and said, "Madam, what are you saying? However, to pass this dangerous road, it's still us old people who can do it. Those outsiders are ultimately unreliable." Madame Wang smiled faintly and didn't speak to him anymore. She brought the 2 maids and walked towards the caravan. Captain Qi saw that just now, when she was being stared at by the ape king, she was still very calm and didn't panic at all. He admired her in his heart and thought, "This woman is really bold. No wonder Master Deng took a liking to her." Madame Wang went to the middle of the caravan to look for Zhang Yan and Li Mu. At this moment, one of the maids beside her said, "When we were surrounded by those apes, I was scared to death. Those 2 Taoist priests actually didn't make a move. Could it be that they are just people who look impressive? Madam, don't be fooled by them." Madame Wang looked at her coldly and said, "I have my own plans for this matter. Since when is it your turn to interrupt?" If I hear such words again in the future, you can take your monthly allowance and go on your way." The maid was so frightened that her pretty face turned pale. She didn't dare to make another sound. Not long after, Madame Wang saw Zhang Yan and Yugu talking to each other. She hurriedly went forward and curtsied, saying, "Greetings to the two Taoist priests. Now that I've encountered a difficult matter, I'll have to rely on the two of you." Zhang Yan and enlightened Yugu looked at each other and said with a smile, "Madame Wang, please speak." Madame Wang told them the whole story. She didn't hide the inside story and even frankly told them her own speculations. In the end, she said, "Right now, I have no choice but to go to that bottomless valley. It's just that although this Taoist Jikong has never killed or robbed merchants in the past, it's better to be safe than sorry. My subordinates may be able to deal with ordinary monsters, but against someone who knows how to use Taoist spells, they're powerless. I'll have to ask the two of you to lend me a hand." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. Actually, if a Dan Shah appeared, it wouldn't be difficult to bring the entire caravan to that cliff. However, this would be too shocking, so he needed to change the route. Thus, he smiled and said, "Marshal Uncle and I have troubled you for many days and we owe Madame a favor. Madame Wang, there's no need for you to take a detour. I have a way for you to pass through here." Hearing that he had a way for them to not take a detour, Madame Wang was delighted. She didn't ask about the method and just curtsied and said, "Then I'll have to trouble the two Taoists." Hearing that the two Taoists in the caravan were going to cast a spell for them to pass through the deep ravine, everyone in the caravan was curious and squeezed to the front of the cliff to watch. When Steward Wu and Qi Weiling heard the news, Steward Wu immediately panicked and said in panic, "If that's really the case, wouldn't we have worked hard for nothing?" Qi Weiling sneered, "Why are you panicking? Don't tell me he can fly us over?" In his impression, those who could fly in the sky and ride the wind and clouds were all unattainable. He was originally from Huiju Taoist Palace, which was the lower house of Lai Xian order, but there wasn't a single person who could do that, let alone bring hundreds of people over. Thus, his first reaction was disbelief. Zhang Yan and Madame Wang came to the edge of the cliff together. He took a few glances and under everyone's gaze, he raised his hand and pointed downwards. Immediately, a white mist extended from his feet. It was as wide as the mountain path and instantly connected to the other side. He turned and bowed, "Madame Wang, it's time to go." Everyone was dumbfounded. The mist was thin and seemed to be able to see through it to the abyss below. People could walk on this path? Madame Wang frowned slightly, then relaxed and smiled. "Taoist's method is quite novel. Let me try it first." "Madam, you mustn't. You mustn't." Steward Wu separated the crowd and stopped her while panting. He stomped his feet and said, "Madam, you mustn't. This is clearly just a layer of mist. How can it surpass others? You mustn't listen to the nonsense of these two Taoists." Steward Wu really wanted Madame Wang to die, but this woman was specifically requested by Celestial Master Deng. If she died here, he wouldn't be able to explain himself. Thus, he came up and tried to persuade her. Madame Wang looked around and said, "Steward Wu is old. Why aren't you guys looking after him? Hurry up and help him down." Steward Wu was immediately helped down by a few guards. Madame Wang turned around and looked at the thin mist. She took a deep breath and stretched out her foot to take a step forward. After testing it, she felt like she was stepping on solid ground. She couldn't help but feel relieved. She took a few more steps forward and stopped. She waved at the two maids behind her and said, "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and follow me." At this time, she had already walked more than 10 feet away from the cliff. From the perspective of others, it was as if she was standing in midair. Below her was a bottomless abyss and there was nothing left to rely on. Just looking at it made one feel dizzy and weak in the legs. The two maids couldn't take it anymore. They supported each other and slowly walked forward. They didn't dare to look down. Not long after, the three of them reached the other side of the cliff. Steward Wu was dumbfounded. He rubbed his eyes as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Suddenly, his whole body trembled and he came back to his senses. He pulled Qi Weiling beside him and said, "What should we do?" If Immortal Master Deng blames us, our lives will be in danger. Qi Weiling was also very annoyed. He waved his hand away and said, "Now that things have come to this, we can only write a letter." In the branch altar of Lai Xian sect in Song country, a Taoist priest who was 20 feet tall was waving his fists and legs under the waterfall, as if he was practicing a set of brilliant fighting techniques. With every movement of his, the rushing water also swelled and surged. At this time, an ape jumped over and landed on a reef in front of him. It lay on top of the reef and held a letter high up. The Taoist walked forward and opened the letter. With just one look, his eyes revealed a fierce glint. He raised his leg and kicked the ape spirit. Blood spurted out of his mouth and he fell into the water with a splash. The Taoist opened his mouth and scolded, "You can't even handle such a small matter. What else can I expect from you?" He clenched his fist and crushed the letter into pieces. Madame Wang was beautiful, and there was a place under the name of the Wang family that produced guang tea. It was one of the good things that Huiju Taoist temple had to offer to the upper court every year. It was very beneficial to his cultivation, so he had long wanted to get his hands on it. However, Madame Wang also had some background. If he tried to force his way, his senior and junior brothers would inevitably come out to stop him. His original plan was for Taoist Ji Kong to come out and secretly snatch Madame Wang. He would then take her as a concubine and train her in the palace. That way, he could occupy her and seize her land. However, he never thought that two Taoists would ruin his plan. Now it seemed that he wouldn't be able to do it if he didn't make a move. The Taoist's face was gloomy. He took out a small flute and blew it. An eagle's cry could be heard from the sky, and an iron-winged eagle descended. He flipped over the eagle's body and shouted. Then, he rode on the eagle and flew towards the south. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 431. Priest Deng flew on the eagle and arrived at the exit of the ravine in less than 2 days. However, he waited outside the mountain for half a day and did not see the caravan come out. Just as he was getting impatient, he suddenly saw someone running down the mountain. From the looks of it, it was Qi Weiling's subordinate. He had seen him once before. He descended to the front of the guard and said with a cold face, "What's going on? Why you here? Where did everyone go? Where's Qi Zhong?" When the guard saw Priest Deng, he immediately knelt down and answered while panting, "Immortal Master Deng, the caravan has gone to Hanjing." Priest Deng was startled, then he said angrily, "Nonsense. The paths in the mountain are winding and winding. After I received the letter, I rushed here at full speed. No matter how fast my feet are, I can only leave the mountain today. Besides, on my way here, I didn't see a single person. How could I have gone to Han capital? Are you trying to lie to me?" At this time, the guard had somewhat caught his breath. He saw that this immortal master was really angry, so he didn't dare to say anything. He reached into his pocket and searched for a while before taking out a letter. He held it high above his head and said, "This is the letter that Captain Qi left for Immortal Master." Priest Deng took it and read it. Only then did he understand the reason behind it. He was so angry that the corners of his eyes twitched and he kept cursing, "Trash." It turned out that Zhang Yan used his qi to form a bridge. After crossing the cliff, he took out a few talismans and burned them. He mixed them into the water and made the people and horses submit. With the help of this talisman, everyone felt their steps become lighter. In just one day, they had passed through 12 winding ravines. Based on the speed of their footsteps. Now that they had arrived at Hanjing, it was definitely not an empty promise. The guard said in a low voice, "Wei Weiling specially ordered me to stay behind and secretly leave a copy of the letter and the appearance of these two people for Immortal Master Deng." Priest Deng's face darkened. He threw the letter and shouted, "Since this happened, why didn't you report to me earlier? Why did you make me wait for so long?" The guard felt wronged and pointed to the sky. He said with a trembling voice, "Immortal Master, as the saying goes, looking at the mountain will kill the horse. Immortal Master is in the sky. This lowly one was pursuing him on the ground. Although I saw him long ago, It was not easy to keep up with him. That's why I was late. Priest Deng resisted the urge to punch this person to death. He snorted, then rode on his eagle and chased after Han capital. But it was already too late. On the way to the capital, as expected, there was no trace of them. It was just as the guard had said, the caravan had already entered Han capital. At this moment, a vast human city appeared in front of him. As soon as he got close, a white-haired Taoist arrived in front of him on an artifact and reprimanded him without any trace of politeness. Which sect are you from? Don't you know that you can't fly above Han capital? He was not allowed to fly in Han capital. This was a rule set by the three sects, and Priest Deng naturally knew about it. However, he was irritated and did not pay attention to it. After being berated by the other party, he couldn't even talk back. He felt even more furious in his heart, but he held back his anger and cupped his hands. Fellow Taoist, I was too rash. After apologizing a few more times and waiting for the other party's expression to clear up, he finally retreated. When he was a few dozen miles away, he was already filled with rage. The reason why he chose to attack at this moment was not without reason. After Madame Wang's husband died, the original Dao Palace talisman was useless and could no longer protect the caravan. This time, Madame Wang went to the Dao Palace to request for a new talisman, and this was a chance for him to attack. If Madame Wang was taken care of by his senior and junior brothers, it would be impossible for him to attack again. He gritted his teeth and said, "Two wild Taoists spoiled my plans, and now they want to leave? How can there be such a good thing in the world?" He waved his sleeves and angrily returned to his cave abode. When he arrived at the subaltar, he took out a shadow painting of the two people, formed a spell, and sent them to his subaltar. Then he sneered, "No matter where you run to, I will find you." Lai Xian sect was one of the three major sects of Middle Pillar State, and they had branches in every state, city, and county. Once the images were sent out, as long as the people in the branch saw it, they would know that it was the people the sect disciples wanted to capture, and they would definitely capture them. However, if the opponent was too strong or came from a major sect, they would have to report to the main altar and not act on their own. Priest Deng only thought that they were two wild Taoists from small sects, and he did not know that they came from Donghua continent, so he did not take it to heart. Otherwise, he would definitely do things according to the rules. At this moment, Zhang Yan had already bid farewell to Madame Wang, and with the fish drum True Spirit and Mountain River Child, he rushed to Middle Pillar State's MT screen. This was the only way to get to Kunyu. This mountain was located to the east of the Middle Pillar continent, and it also pierced the clouds. It was shaped like a wooden comb, and it divided the road into two. It was impossible to pass through it from a high place, so the only way was to go through the belly of the mountain. Although there was no one to lead the way this time, before they parted, Madame Wang gave him a secret map. This map was passed down through the generations of the Wang family, and all the underground paths in the mountain were marked with red lines. The map not only covered the territory of the Kingdom of Song, but also the Kingdom of Qi and Kingdom of Wei. There were also a few secret paths that only the royal family knew about. This made Mountain River Child very surprised. Such a detailed map was impossible to complete even if a lot of manpower and resources were spent, and it would take hundreds of years. With this map in hand, it was enough to make a family flourish. This time, if Zhang Yan did not help Madame Wang greatly, and this woman could see that the two of them were not ordinary people, she would not have given them this item. The Middle Pillar State was vast, and even though Zhang Yan could fly fast, it still took him half a month. Just now, he found another path. Different from other paths that were buried deep in the mountains, before this path, there was a road that could allow 4 horses to run side by side. The stone road was very smooth, and at the end, there were rows of jade steps that led to the waist of the mountain. Zhang Yan had good eyesight, and standing at the foot of the mountain, he could see that there was an altar there, and there were a few tall and strong people who looked like strong men, holding up a big stick made of gold leaf. Under the memorial archway, there were banners with gold bells and colorful knots, jade ornaments, and copper rings. There were a few Taoists dressed in yellow Taoist robes standing there, and they were ringing bells, chanting spells and chanting. The altar was filled with offerings, and behind it, there was a black wooden statue that was half the height of a human. Zhang Yan could see clearly that this was Lord Iya, whom he had seen before. Every time those merchants and travelers went over, they would kneel in front of the god statue, and after they paid their respects, they would go into the cave. Zhang Yan called out to a passing white-haired elder and asked, "Sir, what is the use of this altar on the mountain?" That elder saw that he was wearing a Taoist robe and had an extraordinary bearing, and he didn't look like an ordinary person, so he answered honestly, "This Taoist must have wandered here, right? There are many demons and strange beasts in the belly of the mountain, and they usually hide in the mountains, but in recent years, they have become bolder, and there are even some that come out to hurt people. Thus, last month, the country king invited Lai Xian sect to open an altar here, and people who pass by only need to buy a talisman, and they will be safe on their journey." Zhang Yan nodded his head and said, "So that's how it is. Are those people who are kneeling in worship believers of Lai Xian sect?" The elder seemed to have thought of something, and he sighed and shook his head. "Not all of them are believers, but those few Taoists said that to pass this trial, one must kneel in worship of the god of that sect." Zhang Yan understood the situation here, and he thanked the elder and walked up the mountain. Since there was a sect that was setting up an altar here to perform their rituals, he didn't have any intention to have a conflict with them. When he arrived in front of those few Taoists, he ordered Mountain River Child to hand over a box of jade beads. The Taoist opposite him opened it, and his face revealed a joyful expression. He bowed to Zhang Yan, and he moved to the side to make way. Zhang Yan returned the greeting, and just as he was about to go over, a Taoist with a long beard, who was wearing a pure yang scarf on his head, walked out and stopped him. He said, "This Taoist friend, originally only believers of my sect can enter the mountain, but the two of you are considered to be from my sect, so I won't make things difficult for you. You just have to worship in front of this god statue, and I will let you pass." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and he said, "Taoist friend, those commoners are fine, but I have my own sect, so how can I worship the patriarch of another sect?" In the eyes of those commoners, Venerable Master Iyo was a god. Even if there was no benefit in worshipping him, there was no harm in it. But in Zhang Yan's eyes, it was different. Cultivators only kneel in three ways: heaven, earth, and master. Putting aside the fact that Venerable Master Iya had yet to ascend, even if he became a true immortal, he would still be the patriarch of another sect, so what did it have to do with him? When the long-bearded Taoist heard this, he didn't think much of it. He sneered and he said with a smile, "I see that Taoist friend isn't from one of the three big sects, right? To be able to worship my sect's patriarch is your good fortune. The patriarch of a small sect like yours doesn't have much ability, so it's fine if you don't kneel." Coldness flashed across Zhang Yan's eyes, and he said, "Your sect has insulted I sect with your words. If you don't take back your words, don't blame I for being rude." That long-bearded Taoist glared at him, and he said, "What? You still dare to make a move?" At this moment, a Taoist child hurried over, and he whispered a few words into the Taoist's ear. The Taoist's expression changed, and he looked at Zhang Yan up and down. He then took a step back and he said, "I was wondering where this wild Taoist came from to be so unruly and unreasonable. So it's a demon of the evil path. Men, capture him for me." He waved his horsetail whisk, and more than 20 strong men immediately surrounded him. In the Donghua continent, strong men were just guards and attendants. But here, even the generals, commanders, and nobles, in order to extend their lives and increase their blessings, did not hesitate to spend money to invite people from the three major sects to open altars and cultivate themselves into strongmen. Thus, there were also many techniques passed down. The strong men in front of him were all nourished with secret medicines since they were young, and even if they met a mystic light realm cultivator, they could still fight. Apart from Zhang Yan, there were also the merchants and travelers that passed by the mountain. They were a group of bold people who dared to travel 1,000 miles. Seeing that something had happened, not only were they not afraid, but they even revealed expressions of watching a good show. Zhang Yan laughed coldly. He waved his sleeves, and a cloud of smoke flew out, instantly rolling the 20 strong men on the ground. Seeing this, the long-bearded Taoist was shocked. He didn't think that the Taoist in front of him would be so ferocious. He suddenly thought of something and he rolled up his sleeves and ran over to pick up the statue behind the altar. He was about to use the power of the statue to cast a Taoist technique. Zhang Yan smiled coldly. He waved his sleeves, and there was a loud sound as a ray of water flashed by. When the onlookers looked over, they were all shocked. The area in front of them was already empty. Not only did the Taoist and the dozens of disciples from Lai Xian sect disappear, even the stone altar was empty and had disappeared without a trace. Chapter 432. After Zhang Yan cleared the Xian sect's altar, he entered the tunnel. He found a square rock and sat down. Then he brought out the long-bearded Taoist. It didn't take much effort for him to get the details of the situation. Only then did he know that he had become the person that the Xian sect's various altars wanted to capture. He didn't care about this at all. Even if there wasn't this matter, it wouldn't be easy for him to cross the altar today. At this moment, he suddenly felt the ground tremble. He looked to the side and saw a one-horned, thick and strong five-colored fierce bull turning around the corner. Its mouth and nose made a sound. Seeing that there was someone here, its eyes revealed a fierce glint. With a roar, it moved its four hooves, lowered its head, aimed the horn on its head at the front and brazenly rushed over. The long-bearded Taoist was terrified. He wanted to escape, but his body was restrained and he couldn't move. He was so anxious that his forehead was sweating. He only said, "Run, run, this is a five-colored earth bull." Zhang Yan's expression was indifferent. When the earth ox was about to charge in front of him, he casually stretched out his hand and grabbed the horn firmly. No matter how much strength the colossus exerted, it let out a low roar, and even the soil under its hooves turned over a layer, but in his hand, it was still unable to move even half a step forward. The long-bearded Taoist didn't have much experience. Seeing how brave Zhang Yan was, he was also shocked. Then his whole body quivered. Only then did he know how powerful Zhang Yan was. Thinking of his own situation, he couldn't help but be afraid. He forced a smile and said, "Fellow Taoist, just now, that was just a misunderstanding. If you let me go, I will definitely not pursue this matter. Even if the sect pursues the signal, I can also think of a way to remove it." Zhang Yan didn't care about him at all. He tilted his head and took a few glances. He saw that the one-horned fierce bull's eyes were blood red and it was delirious. It was obvious that it was cursed. If it was a normal mountain spirit, it would have already fallen to the ground in front of him. How would it dare to take the initiative to charge at him? He turned the bull's head to the side. He saw that under its neck, there was a copper needle inserted deep into its hair. If one didn't look carefully, one wouldn't be able to find it. He thought about it and couldn't help but sneer. So that's how it was. What strange beast came out to do evil? This was obviously Lai Xian's sect deliberately using these five-colored earth bulls to hurt people. In order to take the opportunity to recruit believers, they used such a despicable method to deceive the world. How could they still be called a celestial sect? Zhang Yan glanced to the side. Looking at the statue in the arms of the long-bearded Taoist, he sneered in his heart, "Your disciple and grand-disciple are unfilial, don't tell me you are not at fault?" Seeing the statue in the long-bearded Taoist holding the statue in his arms, he was smashed into pieces. He stretched out his sleeve, and with a kacha sound, the deity statue was smashed into pieces. The long-bearded Taoist looked at the wood powder in his hand and was stunned. His entire body trembled as he pointed at Zhang Yan and said in disbelief, You actually dared to shatter the ancestor statue?" He looked like he had gone mad. His face turned red and he shouted, "This is the statue that the sect master gave to us. Anyone who sees this is like seeing the sect master. If you dare to attack us, you are disrespecting Lai Xian sect. Even if we have to go to heaven or hell, we will kill you." Zhang Yan laughed out loud and said, "Then I'll be waiting for you." He stood up and released his water element true light. He brought the long-bearded Taoist and the five-colored earth bull in. Now that he was alone, He had the sword escape technique and the complete spirit contract technique. He could take that step at any time. He also had the star pivot flying palace. No matter how strong Lai Xian's sect was, what did he have to fear? He waved his hand again and kept the fish drum true spirit and mountain river child into his magic treasure. He rode on the sword light and flew away. This ray of light flew like lightning under the ground. When it encountered hard rocks, he didn't dodge at all. He just used the sword light to open the way. He only cared about rushing through. That was why he moved extremely fast. Just now, he saw the benefit of Madame Wang's secret map. The underground paths were so wide and complicated. If it was a normal person, even if they could recognize it, they would only know a few. If it was 1,000 miles away, they probably wouldn't be able to recognize it. Only such a big clan would have such a heritage. Although Mountain River Child knew the way, when he came here, his previous master was a Yuanying Jinren. He wasn't afraid of the extreme heavenly wind. Therefore, he went above the clouds and didn't go underground. Therefore, he couldn't do anything about how to go underground. However, after Zhang Yan walked through it once, the Mountain River map would record it. If the disciples came here in the future, they wouldn't need to find the people of this continent to show them the way. At this moment, 3 Taoists in purple robes came to the foot of MT concealing screen. The 3 of them were dressed in the same color. They wore crane cloaks and Wang Yu crown. They held horsetail whisks in their hands and their bodies were clean. One of the Lai Xian order's subalters was destroyed. It immediately alerted the elders of the sect. They ordered the 3 of them to come and investigate. At the same time, they wanted to eliminate any negative effects. The 3 of them looked for a while and gathered together again. One of them, who was slightly older, said, "Junior apprentice brothers, did you find anything?" One of the Taoists continued, "The altar was sealed by the elders of our sect. Even if we wanted to move it away, we wouldn't be able to do so. Yet this person was able to sweep away the altar along with all the disciples so easily. His cultivation base must be extremely high." The older Taoist stroked his beard and pondered. He said, "Could he be from Jin Ling's sect or Qingshi Temple?" The other Taoist thought carefully and shook his head. He said, "I don't think so." The older Taoist said, "Junior apprentice brother, why do you make such a judgment?" The Taoist pointed behind him and said, "Senior apprentice brother, behind this MG concealing screen is the land of those scattered sections. Jin Ling's sect has conflicts with them. If we go there to recruit believers, they will only be happy to see it happen. Why would they obstruct us? Besides, as long as Qingshi Temple doesn't enter the borders of Qi, they don't care about the outside world. Why would their disciples come to do such shady business?" In the pillar state of Zhong, the 3 sects, Lai Xian Order, Qingshi Temple and Jin Ling sect, were the most powerful. Each of them occupied a country. Although they were wary of each other, fortunately, this continent was rich in resources. If it wasn't for the enmity between the disciples, there were rarely any conflicts. The older Taoist nodded slightly. He said, "Although what Junior apprentice brother said makes sense, it's just speculation. When Elder Pang comes, we will tell him what we saw." The 3 of them waited for less than an hour. The older Taoist's body trembled. He said, "Elder Pang is here. Quickly come and congratulate him." They quickly knelt down and said loudly, "Disciple welcomes Elder Pang. May the elder live a long life." A Taoist riding a crane came from the clouds. Other than 2 boys and several disciples, there were 10 beautiful women. They held fans and stoves, struck bells and played flutes. Their figures and expressions were elegant and beautiful. Behind them, there were more than 100 strong men. They all stood on the flying raft. They held golden spears and iron hammers in their hands, and banners were hung with seals. When this group of people came, celestial music was heard. Spiritual qi surged and a strange fragrance filled the air. It was an extravagant scene. After Elder Pang landed on the cloud, 2 servant girls came up and smoothed the wrinkles on his clothes. At this moment, another female cultivator came up with a golden basin. He reached his hand into the basin and washed it. After wiping it clean with a soft towel, he turned to look at the 3 people kneeling by his feet. He said slowly, "Tong Cheng, how's the matter I asked you to do?" The older Taoist kowtowed. He didn't dare to get up. He lied there and said, "My senior apprentice brother and I investigated and felt that this person isn't from Jinling sect or Qingshi sect. I don't know which sect he came from. He doesn't know the power of the divine sect. Just now, he has done such a thing. The patriarch will definitely punish this person." Elder Pang didn't say anything. He sat there and didn't say anything. The servant girls behind him fanned him. Tong Cheng and the other two Taoists didn't know what he was planning. They couldn't help but feel anxious. After a while, a flying letter came from the sky. It flew over in an instant and hovered in front of Elder Pang. He reached out and took it. He opened it and snorted. He said, "Just as I expected." He threw the letter in front of Tong Cheng and the other two and said, "Go take a look." Tong Cheng and the other two picked it up and looked at it together. They exclaimed, "These two people came from other continents?" Elder Pang squinted his eyes and said, "These two people first appeared in the middle of the mountain path of Huayao Valley. This place is rarely visited and not many people know about it. East of this place is the River of Time, and beyond that is the Donghua continent. This continent is currently experiencing the demonic calamity. These days, many cultivators have come to my place. No one knows what these two people look like, so it's very likely that they came from here." Tong Cheng came to a realization. He said, "Elder Pang is right. I'm afraid they are cultivators from other continents. Just now, they dare to be so unscrupulous. They think I don't know where they come from and can't catch them." Elder Pang sneered and said, "How can we let them go so easily after destroying the Lai Xian sect's branch altar?" Previously, he was not in a hurry to chase after them because he was afraid that they were disciples of Jinling sect and Qingshi temple. If there was a conflict, there would be no end to it. He did not want to get involved in this mess. Therefore, he waited for the sect to find out the background of the two people before proceeding with the next step. Now that he had deduced the identity of the two people, he no longer had such scruples. He waved his horsetail whisk and said in a deep voice, "Where is Bai Kechuan?" Among the row of disciples behind him, a cultivator in his 40s with a calm expression stood up. He stood in front of Elder Pang and said, "Disciple Bai Kechuan is here. What orders do you have for me, honored master?" Elder Pang threw a token and said, "Take my order and gather people from all the altars. Pass through Mount Shield and chase after these two people. Remember, make a big fuss and try to catch them alive. I want those unorthodox rogue cultivators to know the consequences of offending the Lai Xian sect." Bai Kechuan bowed his body and said with his head down, "Yes, disciple." Elder Pang said in a deep voice, "This person can gather qi to form a bridge and can even send hundreds of people over. Today, he also swept through our branch altar. If he did not rely on some magic treasure, his cultivation level is most likely the same as yours and has reached the core transformation realm. Be careful. If you can't do this, don't come back to see me." Bai Kechuan immediately agreed, but he did not think much of it in his heart. Over the years, because of the devil's calamity in Donghua continent, there were many cultivators who fled to the pillar state of China. He had met many of them. Those people's cultivation levels were high and low. Not to mention him, most of them did not have protective magic treasures on them. Usually, when he used his magic treasure, there was no way he could block it and most of them were turned into dust immediately. Over the past few days, at least a dozen people had died in his hands. Naturally, he was very confident. Why would he care about these two rogue cultivators who came out of nowhere? Chapter 433. Zhang Yan used 3 days and just now, he was out of the mountain valley and back to the surface. In front of him was a dirt road. He followed this road and after traveling 5 miles, he saw a horse and mule market with about 1,000 people. A fishy smell assailed his nostrils. He gathered his mana in his eyes and looked ahead. From afar he saw more than 10 scattered settlements. The small ones had about 100 people and the big ones had about a few thousand people. Although this place was not as densely populated as the cities in the Kingdom of Song, and was not a prosperous place, he could still see several streams of spiritual energy rising from the ground. They were like long, straight smoke and did not dissipate. It was obvious that there were cultivators staying here. Ordinary people were unable to see such a scene, and only cultivators like him were able to see it clearly. However, he had found out beforehand that these people weren't members of the Xian sect, but they were rogue cultivators who weren't willing to be restricted by the three sections. They formed a loose alliance with each other, and they were called the Zhenluo Alliance. This alliance was quite powerful, and there were many cultivators in the alliance. If they were to work together, they would be able to fight against the three sections. The Middle Pillar continent was bounded by the hidden Screen Mountain. The east side was the land of Pingdong, where the three sects were located. It had a large population and was the essence of the continent. On the west side was the land of Pingxi. Although there were vast plains and vast mountains, the land was sparsely populated. The people lived by herding animals, fishing, and hunting. The three great sects had originally regarded it as a barren land and rarely came here. Therefore, it was occupied by those loose cultivators. Zhang Yan did not want to meet the few cultivators. He wanted to socialize with them, so he deliberately avoided them. After traveling 100 miles, he got on a cloud and stopped to summon Mountain River Child. After confirming the direction, he sped up and headed towards Kunyu. After another half a day, he was deep into the interior of the Middle Pillar continent. Looking down from the cloud, the land was boundless. The plains were lush with water and grass. Large herds of cows and horses galloped. Ice-blue lakes dotted the land like jewels. The scenery was magnificent and beautiful. However, at this moment, he felt that something was amiss. He stopped and quietly looked around. A look of astonishment appeared on his face. He made a hand sign and released the water elemental True Light. A ray of light spread out in front of him. He concentrated his energy on his eyes and searched inside, only to find that the long-bearded Taoist and the strong man who was trapped here a few days ago had disappeared. He took a closer look. He saw a ferocious-looking strange insect the size of a palm with several pairs of wings on its back wandering around. He couldn't help but say, "So it's you who's causing trouble here." This was the bloodline goldworm that he had captured that day. He had been trapped in the water element True Light for a long time. He had thought that he would have died in the water element True Light, but unexpectedly he was still alive. Not only that, but it also devoured all the people he had thrown into the True Light. After knowing the truth, he was not in the mood to pay attention to it. Just as he was about to withdraw the water element True Light, the golden bug seemed to sense something. It suddenly shook its wings and turned into a beam of golden light that flew out. It had been trapped for a long time, and now that it had escaped the cage, it immediately flew back and forth. It let out a squeaking sound, showing its excitement. Zhang Yan saw it flying happily and said with a smile, "Fine, since you've escaped today, it's heaven's will. I won't catch you again, you can go." He flicked his sleeve and was about to leave, but the golden bug suddenly squeaked and landed in front of him, then circled around him. Zhang Yan saw that the bug didn't have any evil intentions, so he said, "What else do you want?" The golden bug rushed at him again and actually spat out a thick drop of blood. It then floated in front of him without moving. Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. This was the golden bug taking the initiative to recognize him as its master. He thought for a moment and thought to himself, although this bloodline gold insect was raised by the devil sex Yugu Xie, it is still a very powerful flying insect. If I suddenly release it to fight an enemy, it might have a miraculous effect. I might as well keep it. This kind of good thing was delivered to his doorstep, so he naturally wouldn't refuse it. Without hesitation, he stretched out his finger and accepted the drop of blood. Previously, there were hundreds and thousands of golden bugs, but they were trapped in the water element True Light for dozens of years. They couldn't eat flesh and blood, so they could only eat each other. Just now, there was only one left. However, it was also a blessing in disguise. Originally, the golden bug could only follow its instincts, but this one had unexpectedly developed a bit of intelligence. However, it hadn't eaten for a long time and was originally on the verge of death. Until a few days ago, when Zhang Yan threw more than 20 people into the water element True Light, Its life was saved and it was able to eat to its heart's content. Now, not only did its strength recover, even its appearance had changed slightly. After Zhang Yan received the blood, the golden bug let out a happy cry. It folded its wings and landed on his palm. Then, it curled up into a ball with its head and tail intertwined. It was unexpectedly motionless. Looking at the bug's appearance, Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. His eyes flickered slightly as he suddenly had a guess. He smiled and took out a green skin gourd. He opened the cork and put it in. Then he put it away and didn't care about it anymore. He shook his sleeves and once again took up his sword and flew away, turning into a ray of light. However, he didn't realize that at this moment, in the sky, there was a small red cloud flying over. A young lady with 2 conches on her head and a bright red dress was hiding in it. She held an iron mirror in her hand and was looking back and forth. At this moment, she suddenly saw a ray of light flashing in the mirror. She couldn't help but let out a "Ugh." Then she stared at it for a while and her expression couldn't help but tighten. She muttered, "Master said that these few days, we have to be careful of Lai Xian Order's disciples sneaking into Pingxi. This person's Dao technique is really strange. Could it be that he is from Pingdong?" She thought for a while and formed a spell. The red cloud suddenly changed and turned into a flying boat. She stepped on it and with a shout, she activated her mana and chased after him. Even though Zhang Yan was flying, he still maintained a sense of vigilance and immediately noticed that someone was following him. At first, he didn't think much of it. He was using the sword escape technique and his speed was peerless. He thought that he would be able to shake off the person behind him in a moment. However, after traveling for a full hour, he saw that the person was still following him. He didn't know what the flying boat-shaped instrument was made of, but it was actually able to keep up with his sword light. He couldn't help but feel surprised. He was amazed, but he didn't know that the young lady was even more surprised than him. Her instrument was made by the Zhenluo Union. It was specially used to investigate information and send letters. It was a piece of cake for it to travel 10,000 miles in a day. Even if those Yuanying Jinren didn't use an instrument, they wouldn't be able to catch up. She originally thought that she could catch up in a few breaths, but this Taoist in front of her actually used a ray of escaping light and she couldn't catch up even if she used her full strength. Ever since she started cultivating, she had never left Pingxi. Even though she heard the elders and cultivators from other continents talking about the flying sword art, she had never seen it before. Therefore, she didn't recognize that Zhang Yan was using the sword escape technique. She only thought that he was purely using the mysterious light to escape. How could she not be shocked? After flying for a while, her qi was running out. She quickly took out a medicinal pill from her pouch and swallowed it. She adjusted her breath and her spirit recovered. However, she still couldn't catch up to this person. She couldn't help but feel worried and thought, this person's escape technique is so powerful, but I can't stop him by myself. If I let him fly, I don't know what kind of trouble he will cause. I should ask the elders in the sect for help. She waved her hand and took out a flying talisman from her pouch. She chanted a spell and sent the talisman into the sky. In an instant, a ray of light flew to the top of the clouds and exploded in the sky. Even the scorching sun in the sky couldn't cover its brilliance. At this moment, 10,000 miles away, there were 2 cultivators from Zhenluo Union fishing by the lake. One of the young Taoists swung his fishing rod, and the waves flew up. He caught a fierce fish that was 10 meters long and had a mouth full of sharp teeth. The young Taoist laughed and said, "Taoist Ding, I won again." The Taoist at the side smiled bitterly and said, "Taoist Yang's skill is a level higher. I can't compare." The young Taoist smiled proudly and shook his fishing rod again, throwing the fierce fish down. He said, "Again." This person's surname was Yang, and his name was Bingqing. He was originally a cultivator from Donghua continent. He had been in Middle Pillar continent for dozens of years. In the past, he was a guest under Demon King Jiukue. Later, because he offended Pingyuan sect, he thought he couldn't establish himself in Donghua continent anymore, so he came here. In the past, he obtained a secret book on the East Sea. After dozens of years of cultivation, He had reached the first level of core transformation realm and had some status in Jinluo Union. Although he was an itinerant cultivator, he was often proud of being born in Donghua and looked down on the cultivators here. He thought that they only relied on the rare spiritual items in the continent to refine a few more magic treasures, which was why they had some skills. In terms of real skills and ability to fight in battle, no one in the same generation could compare to him. If he also had such rich cultivation items in Donghua continent, why would he have to hide here from thousands of miles away? Taoist Ding beside him seemed to have a lot on his mind. Seeing that the fish in his hand had left the hook again, he put down the fishing rod and said, Taoist Yang, have you heard recently that Lai Xian sect has set up an altar in front of Pingdong Valley Road, saying that they want to come here to preach? If they really come, how can we survive? We need to be careful. Yang Bingqing didn't care and said, Taoist Ding, don't worry. Lai Xian sect may be big, but they are people who are used to living a good life. Why would they come to this poor and remote place to suffer? I think it's most likely a rumor. Ding Taoist shook his head and said, rumors may not be without reason. It's never wrong to be more vigilant. Within a radius of 30,000 miles, the alliance is under our control. If anything happens, we will not be able to escape responsibility. Yang Bingqing felt disappointed and threw the fishing rod away. He said, Fine. Let's go patrol again today. What do you think? Taoist Ding smiled and said, Exactly. As the two were talking, their expressions suddenly changed. They looked up at the sky and saw the shining light. Yang Bingqing raised his eyebrows and said, I think you are right. Taoist Ding suddenly stood up and said in a deep voice, looking at the light, it should be from Lady Situ. Even she couldn't stop it. The person who came must be very skilled. The two of them looked at each other and didn't say anything more. They each took out their flying magic tools and rushed to the place where the signal light was. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 434. In the west side of Hidden Screen Mountain, spirit light flashed and after a few explosions, several flying boats jumped out. Bai Kechuan stood with his hands behind his back and looked ahead. Behind him were more than 50 cultivators. They were all wearing embroidered robes and high boots. Among them, there were 5 who had the same cultivation as him, and they were all at the core formation realm. The remaining 40 or so were mystic light realm cultivators. This force had taken all the branches of the Lai Xin sect in the country of Song. Bai Kechuan looked around and yelled, Come, bring out the compass and find the whereabouts of those 2 wild Taoists. A middle-aged cultivator walked to a spacious area and took out an item. He took off the red cloth covering it, revealing a golden copper compass. He then lit a candle and sat down cross-legged, starting to calculate. However, in the blink of an eye, the black hair on his head had turned gray, and his appearance was haggard. With a thump, he collapsed to the ground. The copper spoon on the compass spun a few times and pointed towards the southwest. It was extremely difficult to deduce the foundation of a cultivator. He had only used this spell for a short while, and he had only roughly deduced the position, but this person's vitality had already been exhausted and his breathing was very weak. However, he still didn't close his eyes and stared at Bai Kechuan. Bai Kechuan walked in front of him and nodded his head in satisfaction. Don't worry. Choose a descendant from your family to enter my religion to cultivate. After the man received this promise, he let out a long sigh. A gratified smile appeared on his face, and he closed his eyes without any reluctance to part with her. He closed his eyes and died. Bai Kechuan raised his hand and waved. Come, take him away. After this matter is dealt with, bury him properly. At this moment, an altar lord suddenly said, Senior Martial Brother Bai, those 2 Taoists were a few days ahead of me. It won't be easy to catch up to them. What do you plan? Bai Kechuan was full of confidence. How could he not be prepared for going deep into Pingxi? He looked behind him and said loudly, Junior Martial Brothers, don't worry. He said loudly, Junior Brothers, there is no need to worry. This time, I have already asked for teacher's permission to use the earthly god statue here. Open the golden bridge of extradition and chase after those two." Hearing this, everyone's expressions relaxed, no longer worried. The golden bridge of summoning was a teleportation technique of the sect. It required a statue of a deity that had been buried in the ground in advance as a support to draw the essence of the spiritual root from the vein of the earth. In the blink of an eye, it could send dozens of people thousands of miles away. However, in order to move the statue of the patriarch, one had to first pray with incense and perform a ritual. Even if this place wasn't within the Xian sect's world, they couldn't ignore it. Otherwise, it would be disrespectful to their ancestors. Thus, they all stopped and split up to make arrangements. At this time, the cultivators of Zhenluo Union who were stationed here had already noticed the commotion, but seeing that there were many Lai Xian sect disciples, they didn't dare to go forward and could only send a letter to ask for help. Bai Kechuan and the others didn't pay attention to them at all. It took them an hour. Just now, after completing the ritual, he arranged the flying raft and made a hand seal. Suddenly, an auspicious light rushed out from the ground. Dozens of people leaped into the sky in an arched arc. Then, they flew away with the light and disappeared without a trace in an instant. The rainbow flew 3,000 miles in an instant and landed again. Just now, this group of people appeared. Bai Kechuan called out a few times and ordered people to dig out the statue that was buried in the ground. Once this teleportation technique was used, this statue would no longer be of use. Thus, the spiritual light on it had already disappeared and it no longer looked like it originally did. The group of Lai Xian sect disciples wrapped the statue in a cloth and carefully placed it in a jade box. They were prepared to bring it back to build a temple and worship it with incense. After settling everything, Bai Kechuan once again used the same method and drove the golden rainbow bridge towards the southwest direction. In just a moment, he had used no less than 12 of the patriarch statues that were buried deep underground. This had already taken up more than half of what Lai Xian sect had set up. However, until now, they still hadn't caught up to Zhang Yan. Among the people that came this time, there was one person who saw him squandering without any worries and felt his heart ache. This person's name was Yu Xiaofang. The statues of the deities in Pingxi were personally buried by him and his esteemed master. It took no less than 300 years. Many of his fellow apprentices died in the process. The price they paid was not small. Putting that aside, each statue was carved from ebony wood that was more than 10,000 years old. This item could naturally be used as a divine weapon. Even though it was the size of a palm, it still required more than 60 core transformation cultivators to take turns to refine it. After 100 years of hard work, they finally made 18 statues and buried them in the ground of Pingxi. These arrangements were originally prepared to be of great use at a critical moment. However, he didn't expect Bai Kechuan to be so extravagant. He didn't even blink and used so much. No matter how rich Lai Xian sect was, they couldn't afford such a waste. Moreover, this way, Zhenluo Union would definitely find out about their arrangements and it would be impossible for them to use this method in the future. However, he couldn't openly object and could only say in a muffled voice, "Senior Marshal Brother Bai, I'm afraid Zhenluo Union will notice our big movements and won't let us go." How could Bai Kechuan not see through his thoughts? He said rather forcefully, "I'm here to show them the power of Lai Xian sect. If you're afraid, just go back." Yu Xiaofang looked at him and said with a trembling voice, "But if we continue to chase like this, when will we catch up? How many more statues do we need?" Bai Kechuan looked at him coldly and said, "This is Elder Pang's order. If this matter is delayed, can you bear the responsibility?" Hearing him say this, Yu Xiaofang's temper rose and he said, "These statues were personally arranged by my sect. How can you use them without restraint?" Bai Kechuan was infuriated. This was the first time he acted alone under Elder Pang's order. He didn't expect that there would be people who didn't care about discipline at this moment. Instantly, killing intent bloomed in his heart and he wondered if he should find an excuse to kill someone to establish his power. At this moment, someone suddenly said, "Senior Marshal Brother, look ahead." Bai Kechuan raised his head and looked ahead. He could faintly see a ray of light flashing past the horizon. Although he couldn't see the person's appearance, it was highly possible that it was the two wild Taoists who tore down the altar. He couldn't be bothered to tangle with Yu Xiaofeng at the moment. He waved his hand and shouted, "Chase!" He used the same trick again. He controlled the great light golden bridge again and leaped over the ray of light, landing in the wilderness in front of him. However, they had only arrived for a moment when the ray of light appeared in their field of vision. In another 10 breaths' time, it had already closed in. Bai Kechuan couldn't help but be shocked and thought, what kind of escape technique is this? How can it be so fast? However, he had already seen the person's appearance clearly. It was one of the two wild Taoists. He sneered and brought a few people to fly up and block in front of him. Zhang Yan just saw the shocking rainbow light pass over his head. However, before he knew what these people's intentions were, there was no reason for him to avoid it. At this moment, he suddenly saw these 50 people lying in front of him. They seemed to have bad intentions. He stopped and bowed. "Fellow Taoists, why are you blocking I's path?" Bai Kechuan sized him up and said coldly, "Let me ask you, were you the one who broke my Lai Xian sect's altar that day?" Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. So it was because of this matter. He didn't expect them to come so quickly. This Lai Xian sect was quite capable. He admitted, "That's right. That day, your disciple insulted I sect, so I had to teach him a lesson." Bai Kechuan's face darkened and shouted, "Then where are the few members of my sect that were captured by you?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Their corpses are long gone." Bai Kechuan couldn't help but be furious and said, "You demon, not only did you dare to kill my Lai Xian sect's disciples, you even destroyed their corpses. Even if you die 10,000 times, you won't be able to forgive your sins." At this moment, he saw that the surrounding people had already spread out and surrounded Zhang Yan. He calmed down and felt that the situation was under his control. He shouted, "Attack!" After Yang Bingqing and that Ding Daoist flew for thousands of miles, a shocking golden rainbow flew over and landed on the ground in an instant. This light looked like a bridge, and it even had the aura of a divine art. After all, he had been here for 30 years only now. He didn't know what technique it was, so he asked in shock, "Brother Ding, do you know which sect's technique this is? Why is there such a scene?" Ding Daoist, who was at the side, was a native. After taking a few looks, he frowned and thought for a moment. He said, "Looks like the Lai Xian sect's golden bridge of extradition." Yang Bingqing frowned. Was it really the Lai Xian sect's people who were playing tricks? He said in a deep voice, "This matter shouldn't be delayed, we need to quickly fetch Lady Situ." Ding Daoist agreed. Without hesitation, the two of them sped up and moved forward. At this moment, the signal light had already dispersed, but they had already identified the direction. After flying for less than 100 miles, they saw an exquisite red cloud that looked like a lip flying over. There was a lady standing on it, and it was Situ Rong whom they were looking for. The two of them hurried over. Yang Bingqing bowed and said, "Lady Situ, is it the Lai Xian sect's disciple in front?" Situ Rong didn't say much and waved, "Senior brothers, you will know after following me." After saying that, she turned and led the way in front. The two of them didn't think much and followed her. After a few miles, they saw Zhang Yan being surrounded by the Lai Xian sect's people. At first, Yang Bingqing's expression was calm, but when he saw Zhang Yan's appearance, he couldn't help but tremble. His mouth was also wide open, and his mind was in a mess. He almost shouted in his heart, "Why is this person here?" Almost no one in the Middle Pillar state knew about Zhang Yan, but Yang Bingqing was from the Donghua continent, so how could he not know? Back then, Zhang Yan fought against 100 people on the East Sea. He was someone who experienced it personally, so he had long seen how powerful this person was. When he hid in the Middle Pillar state, he had already heard that this person had become one of the top 10 disciples of the Qinsong school. This was already an existence that he couldn't reach. Now that he saw him, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He grabbed Ding Daoist and said anxiously, "Go quickly. If we don't leave now, it will be too late." Ding Daoist was confused, but seeing that he was so anxious, he knew that there must be a reason, so he didn't resist and flew with him. Situ Rong saw that he suddenly left and couldn't help but be shocked. However, for safety reasons, she didn't dare to stay here alone, so she also followed. Yang Bingqing escaped 1,000 miles in one breath and felt slightly relieved, so he slowed down his speed. Only then did Ding Daoist have the time to look, and he asked in confusion, "What do you mean?" "No matter how powerful the Lai Xian order is, we have." Yang Bingqing said with lingering fear, "I'm not worried about the Lai Xian order. I'm afraid that the Daoist mistook us as people of the Lai Xian order and killed us as well." Ding Daoist heard what he meant and said in disbelief, "Are you talking about that Daoist? How can he win all these Lai Xian order disciples alone?" Yang Bingqing shook his head, and he remembered that Zhang Yan swept around the East Sea with his sword, and no one could stop him. Even Demon King Jiukui was defeated and left. He couldn't help but sigh and said, "How do you know how powerful this person is? Under this person's sword, I dare to say that even if the Lai Xian order had twice as many people today, they would still be killed, not to mention that there are only 50 people in the Lai Xian order today." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation or monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 435. Hearing Yang Bingqing's words, Daoist Ding's first reaction was disbelief. He shook his head. "From what I see, that person is only at the core transformation level. It's true that he has some skills, or else he wouldn't be here. How is it possible that he can kill the people from Lai Xian sect? Does Brother Yang know who the leader of Lai Xian sect is?" Yang Bingqing was surprised. "Who is it?" Daoist Ding stroked his beard and said slowly, "You haven't been to Middle Pillar State for long, so you don't know this person. He is the 5th disciple of Lai Xian sect's spiritual master Pang. His name is Bai Kechuan. This person has a talisman personally taught by spiritual master Pang. It's called the Sunken Lake Tablet. Once it is used, it can release 4 lights and 4 qi. He has never lost before, so he dares to enter Zhenluo Alliance's territory because he has some confidence." Yang Bingqing saw that Daoist Ding's words seemed to be mocking him for his lack of knowledge and couldn't help but feel displeased. However, he also knew that no one in Middle Pillar State had ascended, so they didn't place much importance on cultivation. They only believed in talismans, so it was normal to have such thoughts. Thus, he controlled his temper and said, "What Brother Ding said is common sense, but this person is indeed different. He is skilled in the art of killing with flying swords. Even without using talismans, he is still very powerful." "Flying swords? Sword cultivator?" Daoist Ding was shocked, his face turning pale. He said subconsciously, "Could he be a disciple of Shaoqing sect?" Shaoqing sect was only separated from Middle Pillar State by the Time River. In the past 10,000 years, they had invaded Middle Pillar State several times. At this time, Middle Pillar State often needed to gather the power of the entire state. Just now, they fought against them, but each time, they suffered great losses. This caused a change in the sections 8,000 years ago, when Donghua State was at its peak. Qinsong School, under the leadership of sect master Qin Qingang and his junior brother Zhui Yuming, suppressed the 8 demon tribes of North Darkstar State. Other than the demon ancestral court, only the snake, turtle, and carp tribes still had some strength left. Yuxiao School's power spread to the north of South Cliff State and the islands of South Sea. The Shaoqing sect was naturally unwilling to be outdone. In order to intimidate the Central Pillar continent, they sent over 60 disciples to kill their way here, and they even killed their way into the interior of MT concealing screen. At that time, all the sects of the Central Pillar State had joined forces and relied on the topography of the mountains. He lured most of them into a formation to fight, just now was barely able to force them back. This battle was especially tragic. The Shaoqing sect lost more than 30 disciples and more than 10 elders, all of whom were injured. The cultivators of the Middle Pillar State also suffered heavy casualties. Less than 10% of them survived. Only later did the Golden Soaring sect appear. Lai Xian sect, Qin Shiguan, these 3 sects rose to power. Even so, in order to prevent the Shaoqing sect from attacking again, the three sects would send large amounts of cultivation materials to the Donghua continent every 60 years to help their disciples cultivate. Nurturing flying swords allowed the Shaoqing sect to regain its position as the #1 sect in just a few hundred years. When the three sects heard that a great calamity was about to befall the Donghua continent, they were initially nervous, afraid that the Shaoqing sect would seek refuge in the Middle Pillar continent. However, when he asked around, he realized that he had worried for nothing. The entire Shaoqing sect was not afraid of this great tribulation. Instead, they were eager to give it a try, preparing to have a good fight with the 6 great demon sections. They temporarily could not care about this place. This also allowed them to calm down and continue to enjoy themselves. When he heard that Zhang Yan was skilled in flying swords, Taoist Ding immediately thought of the Shaoqing sect. Yang Bingqing hurriedly explained, "This person is not a Shaoqing disciple. He is a disciple of the Qinsong school." When Taoist Ding heard that he was not a Shaoqing disciple, he relaxed. Although he had heard of the Qinsong school, in his opinion, only the disciples of this sect could be called sword cultivators. In this world, only the disciples of this sect could be called sword cultivators. The rest were nothing to be afraid of. He glanced at Yang Bingqing and said, "Taoist Yang, we are cultivators of the Zhenluo alliance. Now that the Lai Xian sect has entered our territory, how can we avoid them? Lady Sidhu sent out a signal just now. I believe there will be senior and junior brothers from the alliance rushing over soon. If they see us and not only do they not care about us, they even hide far away, what will they think?" Yang Bingqing frowned and said, "Taoist Ding, do you not believe my words? I'm not talking nonsense or afraid to advance. This person is really powerful. If he wants to kill us, our lives will be in danger." Situ Rong's eyes shone and she asked curiously, "Taoist Yang, is this person really a sword cultivator?" Yang Bingqing said seriously, "I'm not lying." Situ Rong's expression actually showed some yearning as she muttered to herself, "So that's the sword escape? No wonder he's so fast. In the past, I've only heard about how powerful sword cultivators are, but I've never seen it for myself. I'll have to go and take a look." Taoist Ding thought for a while and clasped his hands at Yang Bingqing. "Taoist Ding, since you're afraid, then let me and Lady Sita go together. Taoist Ding can stay here." Situ Rong saw Yang Bingqing's expression change slightly and smiled sweetly. She pointed at her feet and said, "Taoist Yang, even if this person wants to kill us, it's fine. I have this rouge cloud flying technique, even flying swords won't be able to catch up. If you're still worried, you can just hide far away. Plus, we can't ignore this matter. If the elders of the Alliance ask about this, it won't be good for us to say we don't know anything. Don't you think so?" Yang Bingqing thought about it and felt that it was possible with the help of this magic treasure. He sighed and said, "Okay, I'll go back with you too." On the other side, as Bai Kechuan gave the order, the 5 core formation cultivators all took action. They took out their magic treasures and threw them at Zhang Yan. Even the profound light realm cultivators took action. Their magic treasures flashed chaotically and energy surged like waves. They originally thought that this strike would surely cause Zhang Yan to have nowhere to run and would be able to deal with him in one go. But unexpectedly, when those tens of magic treasures had just descended and hadn't even arrived in front of him, they suddenly heard the sound of a surging river, and a ray of water swept out of thin air. It was like jade waves surging, a great river surging, and its imposing manner was boundless. Now that Zhang Yan's great mystery 5 elemental true technique had been completed, the power of the 5 elemental true light was even stronger than before. The magic treasures of the profound light realm cultivators were swept away by the wave. The magic treasures of the 5 core formation cultivators only lasted for a short while. After struggling a bit, they fell into the wave and lost their connection with them. When the water element true light disappeared, they saw Zhang Yan standing in the air with his hands behind his back. His robe fluttered in the wind and his expression didn't change at all. All the magic treasures that came at him were swept away. This scene couldn't help but cause the disciples of the celestial sect to panic. They unconsciously retreated, and the encirclement was immediately broken. Zhang Yan saw that they had suddenly become abnormally flustered, and their expressions were even more panicked. He could not help but feel a little surprised. When he fought against people in the Donghua continent, even if his opponents were no match for him, he had never seen any cultivator act so unbearably in the beginning. However, he didn't know that there was a reason for this. The sects in the Middle Pillar state had fought with the Shaoqing sect several times. No matter how much progress they made in their techniques, they were not a match for the Shaoqing sect. However, with a magic treasure in hand, it was different. Even if a disciple with low cultivation obtained a powerful magic treasure, he could immediately suppress his peers. Also, the Middle Pillar state had countless spirit treasures, and there was no lack of materials to forge magic treasures. The Bu Tian Pavilion, one of the top 10 sects in the East Flower continent, often had disciples come here to practice forging. Therefore, as long as the disciples of the three sects had a bit of cultivation, almost all of them had magic treasures in hand. They were much more extravagant than the East Flower continent. It could be said that most of the battle power of the cultivators in this continent was tied to their magic treasures. Now that it was suddenly broken by Zhang Yan, how could they still have the will to fight? They immediately panicked. Among everyone present, only Bai Kechuan remained calm. Although he didn't know what technique Zhang Yan used, he was confident that he had the heavy lotus tablet in hand and the treasured clothing to protect him, so there was no need for him to be afraid. Seeing that everyone was in a mess, he cursed under his breath. Just as he was about to scold them, he saw Zhang Yan point out with his hand, and a sharp, cold light flew towards him. He didn't expect this to happen. By the time he realized the flying sword, it was already too late. He felt an itch in his throat, and when he reached out to touch it, he grabbed a handful of blood. He was instantly shocked. If it wasn't for the treasured clothing, his head would have been separated from his body. He couldn't help but cry out, "You're a swordsman?" Zhang Yan was also surprised. That sword light just now was just to test the opponent, and it was released casually. He didn't plan on hurting the opponent, and he didn't expect the person to actually stand there without dodging. He couldn't help but shake his head. When fighting against the enemy, how could one stand still? If there was a huge difference in cultivation, then so be it. But if their cultivation was similar, wouldn't this be letting the opponent attack? Even if Zhang Yan had the complete soul contract technique and the treasured clothing to protect him, when they fought, he would dodge if he could, and rarely took the attack head-on. Just now, if it wasn't one sword, but 16 sword lights, this person would have been killed under the sword. When Bai Kechuan saw that Zhang Yan was a swordsman, he felt a chill in his heart. How would he dare to stand so close to him? He hurriedly retreated a few dozen feet. He didn't dare to be careless anymore. He first circulated his mana and activated the treasured light protecting his body to the limit. Then he shook his sleeve and said, "Rise." He threw the heavy lotus tablet into the air. As soon as this item appeared, it sprinkled golden flowers in the air, as if a human figure emerged from it. Although this person's face was difficult to distinguish, one could vaguely see that it was somewhat similar to Venerable Iya. This human figure suddenly opened its eyes, releasing green, purple, red, and blue rays of light. Like long snakes dancing, they came down to kill. When the 50 cultivators at the side saw this item, their expressions changed greatly, and they all fled in all directions. Wherever the four-colored light swept, wind, fire, water, and lightning would erupt. The void shook, and the sound of it echoed endlessly. Bai Kechuan's expression showed that he was straining, and he seemed to be unable to completely control this sword treasure. As the lightning swept, a disciple couldn't dodge in time, and the light hit him. He immediately cried out in pain, and his body was immediately smashed into pieces. Zhang Yan looked at the incoming momentum and smiled slightly. He said, "This has some skill." He didn't panic, and the sword light shot out like a lightning arrow. He immediately left the light behind him, and it turned into a sharp light that went straight for Bai Kechuan's face. Bai Kechuan still didn't dodge. When Zhang Yan's sword landed on the treasured light protecting his body, the light trembled, but he was unharmed. He gritted his teeth, and the four-colored light turned around, sweeping toward Zhang Yan again. Zhang Yan shook his head. The sword light flashed and he dodged the light. After a few flashes, he was more than 1,000 feet away. He stood in the clouds and said indifferently, "If this is all you have, then there's no need to fight anymore. I will take you away right now." Chapter 436. P.S. Although Zhang Yan wasn't bragging about wanting to subdue Bai Kechuan, it wasn't that easy. He said this because he saw that the treasured clothing on Bai Kechuan's body required a lot of mana to be used. Therefore, he purposely provoked Bai Kechuan with words to make him reveal some flaws. Hearing this, Bai Kechuan was also filled with anger. Ever since he started cultivating, when had he ever suffered such a loss? He desperately drove the four-colored light back and forth. The light flickered ceaselessly, stirring and washing, sprinkling down like pouring water. However, Zhang Yan's sword light was extremely fast, and before the wind, fire, water, and lightning attacks could reach him, he would already be on the other side. Although the surrounding disciples could see that something was wrong, even if they had treasures, they couldn't interfere with the battle between the two. Otherwise, if they weren't careful, they would be affected by the heavy lotus plate. Furthermore, most of them were empty-handed, so they could only watch from the side. Bai Kechuan saw that no matter how much power he used, the four-colored light couldn't land on Zhang Yan's body. He was shocked and afraid, knowing that he would be in trouble if this continued. When he fought with his enemies, he was always successful. He only needed to use the heavy lotus plate to take down his opponent, but he had never been in such a predicament. His treasures couldn't hit his opponent at all, so how could he win? Zhang Yan saw that he was still defending well, so he didn't want to waste time with him. He smiled and said, "Let me take care of the spectators first, then I'll join you." He pressed the sword pellet down, and 10 bright sword lights split out. He pointed his finger, and they circled around Bai Kechuan's body. Although they didn't land, they were threatening. After that, he spread out the sword gleam and went far into the sky. He chased behind a disciple of the Lai Xian sect and cast the water element true light downwards. A person came in. Then, the sword gleam leaped and flashed to the other side. It was the same. In just a few breaths of time, he had already captured 6 people in succession. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before he would be able to clean up all of the people here. The Mystic Light Realm disciples didn't even have the ability to fight back against him. They all ran away and screamed, "Senior Martial Brother Bai, save us!" Bai Kechuan's face was livid. He had never expected that Zhang Yan would completely ignore him and turn to pick on his fellow disciples. There were a few times when he couldn't help but want to attack, but when he saw the faintly flashing sword pellets around him, he restrained himself. After experiencing that sword strike from before, he already knew that if he dared to act rashly and be careless, then that flying sword that came out of nowhere would be able to take his head. So when facing his fellow disciples being slaughtered, he actually hardened his heart and forcefully endured it, and he didn't lend a hand in the slightest. In reality, Zhang Yan's 10 light-splitting sword rays were not as powerful as he had imagined. Although the light-splitting separation and reunion technique was powerful, it required the swordsman to stand in one place and use his mind to control it. Right now, he was just taking advantage of the fact that he didn't know the ins and outs of the situation and was only putting on an act. As expected, the latter was intimidated. Bai Kechuan kept plotting countermeasures in his heart. After a while, he suddenly raised his head, looked at one place, and said in a deep voice, "5 junior brothers, are you still not going to attack? If we wait for this person to wipe out all the martial nephews, then it will be your turn." The 5 core formation cultivators who followed him were standing together at this time. They were the altar masters of the various altars. Because their cultivation levels were higher, Zhang Yan didn't attack them first. When Zhang Yan attacked, these 5 people unconsciously leaned together. With their fellow disciples taking care of each other, after the initial panic, they also calmed down a little. To be able to reach such a position in the Lai Xian sect, although Zhang Yan had taken away their prized treasures just now, how could they only have one treasure with them? It was just that they saw that Zhang Yan's technique was strange, so they had some selfish motives. They wanted to keep their treasures to protect themselves and didn't want to lose them for no reason. They weren't stupid, it was just that they couldn't see clearly. Now that Bai Kechuan said this, their hearts trembled, and they immediately understood the situation in front of them. They looked at each other a few times, and one of them said, "Senior brother Bai is right. This is Zhenluo Union's territory, there is no way out for us. If we don't kill this person now, do you think we can go back alive?" Bai Kechuan said loudly, "That's right, we can only get out of this predicament if we work together." Yu Xiaofang, who had a disagreement with him before, was also among them, but he didn't have a good expression. At this moment he couldn't help but mock. "Bai Kechuan, where did your prestige just now go? If it wasn't for you, how would we end up like this? After we return, I will definitely report what happened today to the sect master." Bai Kechuan snorted and said, "Yu Xiaofang, it won't be too late to say this after you leave." Yu Xiaofang coldly replied, "Then you don't have to worry about it, great immortal Master Bai." Bai Kechuan snorted, but he didn't say anything else. Yu Xiaofang looked at the battle in front of him and said in a low voice, "This Taoist Dao technique is strange, it seems to be able to take people's magic treasures. We can't take out our magic treasures at the same time to avoid repeating the same mistake. When we fight later, 2 of us will attack, 2 of us will look after him, and 1 of us will protect him from the side. If our magic power isn't enough, then 2 of us will go up. What do you guys think?" The other 4 saw that although his arrangement was simple, they couldn't think of a better way to deal with such a strong enemy in such a short time, so they all said, "We'll do as senior brother Yu says." The 5 of them roughly discussed and decided on how to cooperate with each other. Before this, they had never fought with a cultivator like Zhang Yan who didn't rely on magic treasures, so they suffered a loss. After they gained some experience, they would naturally change the way they fought, so they wouldn't be so embarrassed the next time they fought. However, the premise was that they could return alive from this battle. When Zhang Yan and the Lai Xian sect disciples fought, Yang Bingqing, Situ Rong, and the other 2 had already returned. They hid far away and watched the battle. At this moment, the 3 of them had different expressions. Yang Bingqing's face couldn't help but twitch. Back then on the East Sea, he also saw this scene. More than 100 people went up to attack one person, but in the end, they were defeated by this person. Thinking about it now, he could still feel the cold killing intent. Situ Rong's beautiful eyes lit up, and she couldn't take her eyes off it. Even though it was the first time she had seen a sword cultivator fight, she could still feel the carefree feeling of the sword lights flying around. She wanted nothing more than to have a sword pellet in her hand so that she could practice it properly. However, Ding Dao's face was solemn. He frowned and didn't say a word. Zhang Yan didn't spend much effort and wiped out the more than 40 Xian Light sect disciples. He flicked his sleeves, turned the sword light around, and turned back to fight the 5 core formation cultivators. Seeing this, Yu Xiaofang shouted, "Senior brothers, what are you waiting for? Quickly attack." Immediately, 2 people took out their magic treasures. In an instant, 2 completely red, burning with raging flames, and 3 feet high escape pillars fell down. Other than the magic treasures of the Lai Xian sect that were passed down by their own sect, the rest were all given by the sect, so they were more or less the same. Seeing that they didn't attack at the same time like before, Zhang Yan also smiled. He shook his shoulder, and the mysterious yellow dragon capturing hand jumped out of his head. He reached out and grabbed the 2 magic treasures in his palm. After this Dao technique was nourished by his true seal's spiritual essence, its power had also risen steadily. If it was in the past, it would have been difficult to defend against a transcendent artifact, let alone capture it. But now, it was a piece of cake. The 2 people who took out their magic treasures were shocked when they saw this, and they hurriedly used hand seals to take back their magic treasures. Yu Xiaofang, who was behind them, knew that the situation was bad, and he shouted, "Quickly help these 2 Dao brothers." He and the other Daoist flicked their sleeves and also took out the magic treasures in their hands. They attacked Zhang Yan, hoping to help their fellow sect members. Who knew that the moment their magic treasures left their hands, Zhang Yan laughed loudly, opened his sleeves, and shook them forward. In an instant, boundless waves surged out from below him, and the two magic treasures were swallowed by the waves before they could even get close. Then with a rush it swept over. Yu Xiaofeng and the other three had no way to dodge, and in the blink of an eye, they all fell into the water curtain. When Zhang Yan turned around with his hands behind his back, his expression was as calm as an ancient well. The water light behind him surged backward, and like a tired bird returning to the forest, it slowly entered his body. At this moment, other than Bai Kechuan, there was no one else in the field. Bai Kechuan's hands and feet turned cold, and he trembled all over. Taoist Ding looked at the tall figure in the field from afar and couldn't help but ask, "Dao brother Yang, which sect do you think this person is from?" Yang Bingqing said in a deep voice, "Qin Song School." Taoist Ding cupped his hands and said, "Although I have heard a little about this sect, I wonder how it compares to Shaoqing sect?" Yang Bingqing thought about it and said, "Donghua continent has 10 Xianmen sects, and among them, 3 are the most powerful. Shaoqing sect is only one of them, and this Qinsong school is one of them. Its power is no weaker than Shaoqing, and this person's surname is Zhang Yan, and he is one of the top 10 disciples in the sect." Seeing the inquisitive look in Taoist Ding's eyes, he explained, "The top 10 disciples of Qinsong school are almost all under Taoist Dong Tian." Yang Bingqing actually didn't know the real background of Zhang Yan. He only said this to cover up his cowardly action of hiding when he saw him just now. But under normal circumstances, his assumption was not wrong, and it was not an exaggeration. Hearing that Zhang Yan's background was so extraordinary, Taoist Ding couldn't help but gasp. According to Yang Bingqing, this person's position in the sect was not low, so why did he come here? Was it like Shaoqing's sect, to rob the spiritual items produced in the Middle Pillar continent? He frowned deeply, sighed, and said, "Lai Xian sect, Qinsong school, it's really troubled times." He looked left and right and said in a deep voice, "This matter cannot be ignored, we must report it to the elders in the alliance." Yang Bingqing didn't mind, but at this moment, his expression suddenly changed. Just now, he inadvertently glanced over, and it seemed that Zhang Yan was intentionally or unintentionally looking at him. His heart suddenly tightened, and a layer of fine sweat also appeared on his forehead, and he said in a low voice, "Brother, we should leave." Taoist Ding looked at the scene, and saw that in less than a quarter of an hour, Zhang Yan had already wiped out all the people on the periphery, leaving only one person. But he didn't think that this disciple of Lai Xian sect could win, and it was only a matter of time before he was defeated, so he said, "It's time to leave." He thought that if he were in the same place, he would definitely kill everyone here, so that Lai Xian's sect wouldn't find out. At this moment, he could take advantage of the fact that the other party had no time to care and leave. If he was a little later, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to escape. Latest update, please bookmark. Chapter 437. Although Bai Kechuan's experience in fighting was not as different as Zhang Yan's, it was still very far. However, he was not very courageous. After being forced back by the 10 light-splitting sword shadows, he did not dare to take a step forward for the sake of his own life. However, he also knew that this was not the way to go on. His protective clothing required mana to protect his body at all times. There was no need for Zhang Yan to do anything. When his mana was exhausted, it would be the time for him to die. He originally wanted to use the heavy leaf plate to repel the 10 sword gleams. However, the 4-colored pillar of Qi kept crashing downwards. Although he was able to knock it away every time, the sword gleams only made a turn when they reached the periphery before returning back. There was no way to get rid of it. Just as he was panicking, he glanced to the side and saw that Zhang Yan had already wiped out his fellow sect members. At this moment, Zhang Yan had turned around and was heading towards him. He could not help but be frightened. How would he dare to let Zhang Yan get close? He immediately started a spell and the heavy leaf plate forced out rays of spiritual light. In an instant, it became bigger. In an instant, the 4 Qi merged into one. A rippling wave of light fell like a pillar. However, this time, it did not attack Zhang Yan. Instead, it covered him. With the protection of this treasure, he calmed down a little. He looked at Zhang Yan and lowered his posture. He forced out a smile and said, "This Taoist, today's matter was originally a misunderstanding. Now that you have eliminated my fellow sect members, you must have vented some of your anger. How about this? These treasures can be considered as an apology. Let's call a truce. What do you think?" Zhang Yan saw that he was using all his strength to defend himself, so he did not come over. He just stood on the clouds with his hands behind his back and said calmly, "Today you came to capture me. If I let you go just like that, wouldn't it seem like I am too easy to bully?" Ever since Bai Kechuan started cultivating, everything had been smooth sailing. When had he ever been so humble? Hearing those words, he couldn't help but feel embarrassed and annoyed. He clenched his fists and scolded, "You Taoist, don't push your luck. I'm a disciple of Lai Xian sect. My master, Pang Yuzhong, is a Yuaning Zhenren. If you capture me, my master and the elders of the sect will not let this matter rest." Zhang Yan could tell that he was putting on a strong front, but he was cowardly at heart. He smiled and said, "Now that you're in front of me, even if your master's cultivation was 10 times higher, what can he do to me?" Bai Kechuan's breathing stopped. He was originally a person with a fickle personality. Thinking of the current situation, his eyes couldn't help but reveal a bit of panic. However, his chest was filled with hostility, and he refused to lower his head. He said sternly, "Do you think you can win against me?" Bai Kechuan bit the tip of his tongue. He raised his head and spat out a mouthful of blood, which immediately stained the sinking lotus tablet. With the aid of this mouthful of blood essence, the tablet suddenly trembled and released several tens of brilliant, colorful flames. Then, it grew to a height of 100 feet, and the four-colored light swirled before dispersing before descending again. However, this time, it was several times more powerful than it was just now. Zhang Yan smirked and said, "Although this magical treasure of yours does have some tricks up its sleeves, but in I's opinion, it's not difficult to break it." He didn't seem to make any movements, but with a slight shake of his shoulder, a misty green light rose behind him. The green light was boundless and full of vitality. As it rose, it collided with the four-colored light. There was a loud noise. Streams of light scattered in the air. Water, fire, wind, and thunder were swept away at the same time. The green brilliance was cut off in an instant. Bai Kechuan saw that he was able to take on his magical weapon head-on and could not help but reveal an expression of joy. He thought to himself, "What a reckless person. If you wanted to avoid it, I would not have been able to do anything to you. But since you came in yourself, I will let you see the power of my master's magical weapon." However, he didn't get to be happy for long before his expression gradually changed. Although the four-colored light fell down like hail, no matter how he exerted his strength, it was unable to disperse the green brilliance. On the other hand, it was like the grass on the plains, growing again when it was cut off, growing again when it was cut off. It seemed to be endless and grew without end. Zhang Yan lightly smiled. Although Bai Kechuan was full of vigor and seemed to have the upper hand, he could not last for long. Once this round of attacks was over, he could only wait for death. Although this sunken leaf tablet was extremely formidable, its might was determined by the strength of the person holding it. In less than 10 breaths of time, Bai Kechuan felt a wave of exhaustion assault him. When he saw his magical treasure was unable to do anything to Zhang Yan, his fighting spirit immediately suffered a heavy blow, and despair couldn't help but arise in his heart. He couldn't help but open his mouth to beg for mercy. But this time, Zhang Yan paid no attention to him and acted as if he didn't hear him. As this went on, Zhang Yan gradually gained the upper hand, and the wood element true light became more and more exuberant as it gradually charged upwards. Not long after, the light abruptly charged upwards and collided with the sunken leaf tablet. A loud bang resounded out as the tablet was knocked flying, and the four-colored light dispersed in an instant. Bai Kechuan seemed as if he'd suffered a heavy blow, and his entire body trembled before he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood, and he held his chest as he retreated in panic. Zhang Yan shouted out with a clear voice as he flicked his sleeve, sending out a strand of water element true light. With a sweep, it swept Bai Kechuan into it, and then he casually stretched out his hand to summon the sunken leaf tablet. When he placed it before him to take a look, he noticed that it was actually a profound artifact, and he couldn't help but sigh. This magical treasure is strange, but this person's strength is insufficient and is unable to fully utilize its profundities. With a flip of his palm, he put away the magical treasure, and then his gaze swept downwards. He pondered for a moment before spreading out his sword light and flashing swiftly towards the east. In the next moment he saw 3 silhouettes flying hastily in front of him. Yang Bingqing suddenly sensed something, and he turned his head to take a look behind him. He couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh and said, "Fellow Ding, there's no need to go any further. You can't escape." Hearing that, Priest Ding and Situ Rong also took a look behind them, and their faces revealed a shocked expression. After looking at each other, they stopped one after another. They also understood that this place was spacious, and there was no one from the Alliance to receive them. As a sword cultivator, it was extremely easy for the other party to catch up with them. Rather than losing face, it was better to stop and have a good talk with him. If he really wanted to kill them, then it wouldn't be too late to fight then. They were originally on guard, but unexpectedly, when Zhang Yan arrived in front of the 3 of them, he wasn't as aggressive as they had imagined. Instead, he bowed and said politely, "May I ask where you 3 fellow Taoists are from?" Priest Ding was startled. Seeing that Yang Bingqing and Situ Rong didn't reply, he went forward to return the greeting and said, "Fellow Taoists, greetings. We are cultivators from the Zhenluo Alliance, and because the Lai Xian sect entered our territory for no reason, we came to investigate. Just now, seeing that fellow Taoist has displayed his divine might and captured all of these people, we were afraid that if we showed ourselves rashly, we might incur fellow Taoist displeasure, so we didn't come to greet you. Please don't blame us." Zhang Yan revealed a playful expression and said, "From what fellow Taoist said, could it be that the relationship between your alliance and the Lai Xian sect isn't good?" Priest Ding originally couldn't directly answer this question, but in order to gain Zhang Yan's trust, he replied with a straight face, "That's right. The disciples of the Lai Xian sect have always been overbearing and arrogant, and the disciples of my alliance have always hated them. Fellow Taoist must have experienced it." Zhang Yan stretched out his hand, and a ray of light flowed out. Bai Kechuan rolled out and he said, "I was just thinking about how to deal with this person. Since your alliance has enmity with this sect, then I'll let your alliance deal with him. What do you think?" Priest Ding was startled, and his expression turned ugly. This Bai Kechuan was a hot potato, and if he accepted it, it would be extremely inappropriate. However, if he didn't accept it, what he said just now would be for nothing, and it might even make the other party suspicious. He hesitated for a while, and in the end he clenched his teeth and said, "All right, this person will be dealt with by us." He raised his hand, and a ray of Dan Sha was released, and he took the unconscious Bai Kechuan over. Seeing that he had taken Bai Kechuan, Zhang Yan first gave Yang Bingqing a meaningful glance, and then he bowed, "Since this matter is settled, then I shall take my leave. The 3 of you, we may meet again in the future." He turned his sword light and left, and after a few breaths, he was gone. Priest Ding looked at Bai Kechuan in his hand, and he felt extremely depressed, and his face showed some worry. Yang Bingqing sighed, "This is a plan to divert the trouble. How could Priest Ding not see it? After taking this person down, how could the Lai Xian sect let it go? It was really hard to guess how things would end up, but just now, how would he dare to reject them?" Situ Rong looked at Bai Kechuan a few times, and she said excitedly, "What are you 2 afraid of? From what I see, this is a good thing. This Bai Kechuan trespassed into our territory, and now that we have him in our hands, when we return to the alliance, how can we not be credited?" Priest Ding wasn't as optimistic as her, and he shook his head. "This Bai Kechuan's identity is different. He is a disciple of the Lai Xian sect's altar, and there is no benefit in making a big deal out of this. If the elders have the intention to keep the peace, it is possible that they will send him back, and then punish us." Situ Rong was stunned, and she said, "Will that be the case?" Yang Bingqing sighed. Although the land of Pingxi is not as prosperous as Pingdong, it is still considered comfortable. Which elder would be willing to become enemies with the Lai Xian sect? If they had done something earlier, how could they let them bully us all the way to our territory without doing anything? Yang Bingqing's eyes flickered, and he said, I have a way to avoid this disaster, but it depends on whether Brother Ding and Lady Sidu dare to do it. Priest Ding looked over, and his eyes were filled with anticipation, and he said, Brother, please speak. Yang Bingqing said softly, You just have to kill this Bai Kechuan. Priest Ding was stunned for a while. As long as he killed this person, it would be impossible for the elders in the alliance to reconcile the two factions. By then, they naturally wouldn't fall out with them for a dead person, and instead, they would reward them greatly. His heart immediately churned, and he was a little hesitant. Situ Rong saw it clearly, and she said, Senior Brother Ding, this Bai Kechuan trespassed into the territory that you and Senior Brother Yang are guarding. Capturing this person is also the responsibility of the two of you, and you are in the right. If you accidentally kill him, no one in the alliance can blame you. Moreover, little sister is here, what are you afraid of? Her words immediately made Priest Ding make up his mind, not because of what she said, but because Situ Rong had some background in the alliance, and she was willing to stand with them, so this matter would be more responsible. He sighed and he said, This is the only way. As soon as he said this, Yang Bingqing stretched out his hand, and a black and white sword chi flew out, and cut off Bai Kechuan's head. After Zhang Yan said goodbye to the three, he didn't care where they were going to cut off Bai Kechuan's head. He just flew southwest according to the direction that Mountain River Child pointed out, and after flying for another month, he saw a dark blue color in the sky. Looking closely, it was actually a floating continent in the sky, and it was unknown how big it was. This was the Kunyu that sect leader Qin had mentioned. After looking a few times, he pulled out his sword, turned into a rainbow light, and entered the clouds, and went straight to this continent. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.